Ladies and gentlemen, this is the state of the scene.
Yo, what the fuck is up, Warped Tour? The state of the scene at SOTS Podcast on all social media. Sam here with Marcos.
We said, what the fuck is up? We can't hear you, Warped Tour. I don't know. I'm still trying to. I'm finding it.
Yeah, no, you'll get there someday. What are we, fucking 10 years in? You'll find your opening. So,
Yes.
we have a very special episode for everybody today. Obviously, two massive releases dropped the day we're recording this, Friday, May 24th. That would be Clancy by 21 Pilots and Posthuman Next Gen by Bring Me the Horizon. Surprise drop. So what we've done is we've kind of shifted things around this episode a little bit. We're going to discuss some smaller news stories here up top before we get right into the news. And we're going to save for the very end our thoughts on Bring Me the Horizon and 21 Pilots. So with all that being said, did you see Ben Barlow from Neck Deep married their longtime partner, Niam Holmes?
You know how I feel about marriages in this scene, Sam.
Oh, what? What do you mean?
You know how I feel.
How do you feel?
I feel we get married, we find the love of our life.
Uh-huh.
We start having kids.
Sure.
You start looking to settle down, and then all of a no, you're out of your band.
It's not punk.
It's a slippery slope
to get married and settle down. It's just not.
Yeah.
Or no, how does the song go? It's not hardcore to have a family
Unless you
live hardcore. Yes,
Sure,
precisely.
yeah.
To be fair, they had been together for 12 years. So like, it hasn't
Right.
seemed to have.
the clock's already started.
It hasn't stopped Ben Barlow from showing up naked in 3 music videos this year. I think the silly whimsy will not be squashed by having a loving relationship. I think your fears are not warranted here.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I'm a skeptic.
I think
I've
Ben
always
Barlow-
been a skeptic.
Ben Barlow, he bleeds pop punk. You don't understand. Like, there's no keeping this man away from the game, all right?
They all bleed pop punk until they don't.
His kids will be in future Neck Deep music videos. The Department of Justice are looking to break up Live Nation and Ticketmaster in new antitrust lawsuit. Can I get a W in the comments?
W.
Not from you. From you, I had like thoughts and opinions. But from our
Thoughts?
listeners, W in the comments.
Thoughts and opinions,
Yeah.
bro.
You put pro?
Rip
or
bozo
against?
across the board. Fuck you, Ticketmaster. Fuck you, Live Nation. Hope both of you suffer from this. I hope the suffering never ends from both of you.
There was some stat going around that like Live Nation and Ticketmaster own like 55% of the venues in like the country, and like you can only get tickets to shows 70% of shows through them. It was some crazy ass fucking like that's
Listen,
an approximation of what I remember, but
that's
like
a fucking monopoly.
Yeah.
we don't.
Yeah,
we
that's
don't
precisely correct.
fuck with monopolies.
yeah.
No monopolies in hardcore. I've always said.
Though that being said, to sort of like spin this, hardcore monopoly would go
Wow.
crazy.
I think that's generally just what that is. Tensions are
You
high.
land on the house from Collide with the Sky.
See, do you buy it?
You know, you owe that money because it's in such bad shape. You know what I
Rent.
mean? It's a terrible house. Like, no upkeep whatsoever. Could not happen sooner, by the way. Like, I need them broken up. Like, they need to fast track this. Like, we need them
Yeah,
in court next week, and then like divested the week after that, and ticket prices drop and are halved the following week.
Yeah, worst part about this is looking to like
Yeah.
You don't even give us like what phase of that you're in. It's just like, bro, my son just paid like an outrageous amount of money for like whatever ticket for whatever sleep token.
Yeah.
And then like someone in the Department of Justice really took that to heart and he said, we got to look into this.
Oh, you're saying like Biden's son Hunter was like he was
That's a
going to
50-year-old man.
called his dad because sleep token tickets were so expensive. Yeah, that's precisely correct.
It was
He's still a
actually,
son
you know who it was?
with a father.
I bet it was like Chet Hanks, and he
Sure.
made Tom Hanks make a phone call. Have you seen Chet Hanks and how he posts on Instagram?
I also saw his breakdown of the Drake Kendrick beef, which I enjoyed quite a bit.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. He posts, and I made this. I had this insight. I posted it on Twitter, but like he kind of posts like he's Vessel from Sleep Token, and like I'm not saying that where there's fire or where there's smoke there's fire,
Oh my God.
but Listen, Chet built like a tank. So was Vessel, bro. Ripped. Both of them like kind of poetic.
Okay.
A little bit. Chet, you might not suspect it. Way more poetic than Hunter Biden.
All I'm hearing is Vessel is a Nepo baby. KCF canceled all upcoming tour dates while vocalist Tom Weaver receives open heart surgery and takes time to recover. Marcos, I was fucking winded by this statement. If I understood or if I recall correctly, he was dealing with complications from like a bad flu case that has since now led to this. And it's no surprise that Casey is, going to take a little pause here while he works his way through this. Just wanted to kind of take a minute to wish him the best and let him know that we're thinking of him. And then that sucks. That is, that's no fucking joke.
Truly one of the last things you'd ever hope to see anybody have to deal with. Hoping for a speedy recovery in general. And obviously with Casey, take as much time as you fucking need until you're back to 100%. And hopefully, again, that's soon.
Yeah, 100%, Marcus. And finally, a little bit of warm up here. Last thing I wanted to talk about was You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To by Knocked Loose, we reviewed that just recently. You can go check that out. Charted at number 23 on the Billboard Top 200. Marcos, number 23. Huge, massive, insane, honestly.
It's pretty good.
That's number 23. That's number 23 for a metalcore, hardcore band. Like, this shit does not happen often. Like, it just doesn't. Which is why I think it's really exciting.
Listen, it's
when
that
it does
target.
to bring
It's
to
the
the show and
target
talk
bump.
about it. What do you mean? The target?
The target bump.
Oh, you're saying because easy
got that
accessibility.
Exclusive
Right.
Knocked Loose variant being sold at Target.
Yeah.
That's the type of thing that'll beef up sales.
Take advantage of your 5% off using your red card as well.
Yes, do you?
Yeah, I mean, why not? If you're there. They also, I think they were like number one for like hard rock albums. They knocked Linkin Park out of the top spot, who essentially I think have owned it since the drop of their anniversary collection recently.
Wow, good for them.
Or greatest hits or whatever that is.
I mean,
yeah.
you love to see it too. Obviously, again, we reviewed that. We liked it. Spoiler if you haven't watched that review.
Yeah.
And always good to see a band, like a prominent band in our scene, or any band in this scene, crack the top 250, 200, and 150. As far down as like 23, it's great. And the cool thing about Knocked Loose is that sky is still the limit. I think next album could easily be a 15, right?
Yeah, if you're, anticipate growth here with how much everybody loves that album. Also, for what it's worth, I don't know if we mentioned it last week, but Suffocate, one of the tracks off this album featuring Poppy is still in the top 50 viral US tracks on Spotify. It was in the top 10 for like a hot second.
Damn.
It's since fallen to like 23. A bunch of new music comes out that's going to fucking happen. But the fact that it's still on there, I think, is like deeply impressive. Or the fact that it was even on there to begin with, honestly. Marcus, as always, every link you need is in the description of this episode, including our socials, playlists, merch, and Discord. Subscribe to us on YouTube at SOTS Podcast YT, and leave a thumbs up if you're watching the video version of this podcast. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave 5 stars. And if you want to support us, you can consider becoming a patron for exclusive content, the ability to submit questions to the show, and producer credits on all of our video content. That's patreon.com/SOTS Podcast. Marcus, we're trying to get 50 new patrons by the end of the month. By the time this comes out, we'll only have a few days. We're halfway there. So, if you can, now is the time to get in there, support for only $3 a month, and you get a shout out on the show. This week we want to thank Not My Real Name, Logan D, Leota, and Mickle D. Not My Real Name is one person. Logan D is another. Marcos, who was so ashamed that they didn't want their name said on this podcast? I need to know.
Vessel.
Technically, that would be the one answer I would accept. It was like, oh, obviously, you can't tell me who you are.
Can't tell me
or
your
you
Vessel.
would-
You can't tell me
Right.
who Vessel is.
You would break the spell that's been cast over here. Marcus, patrons also receive access to bonus podcasts, SOTS Deluxe. On this week's Deluxe, we're going to talk about the state of mental health in the scene with recent news from the likes of Bad Omens, The Amity Affliction, and See You Space Cowboy. Patrons can also submit suggestions for our weekly YouTube show, Ranking the Scene. On this week's Ranking the Scene, our YouTube exclusive show that airs every Wednesday night, we bring albums to the ever-growing tier list, including Suicide Silence, Danger Kids, and Beartooth. Marcos, the goal of that show, as everyone knows, is to figure out what the best album in the history of the scene is. And coincidentally, the worst. Like I said, changing it up this week, we're going to get right into the news, brought to you by Shibori Threads, the clothing label of the alternative music scene.
The news.
BABYMETAL and Electric Callboy have teamed up for new single, Ratatata.
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 Yes.
BABYMETAL had this to say on the new track. Unbeatable. Let's foo-foo together with Ratatata. Electric Callboy added. Working with BABYMETAL was so much fun. We joined our creative forces, and in the end, we brought together the best of both worlds. We love Ratatata. The music video for the track has exceeded 1 million views in just over a day. BABYMETAL are playing their very own Fox Fest this weekend in Japan, Marcus, with, you guessed it, support from Electric Callboy, alongside Polyphia and more. BABYMETAL currently stands at 2.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify, while Electric Callboy claims 2.4 million. Marcos, they're neck and neck.
Look at them.
They're neck and neck. They ran the numbers, and they said together, we could be nearly 5 million monthly listeners. We'll just create one singular project. Baby Callboy.
Easy.
Electric Metal.
So in 1 month, if this song somehow doesn't have 5 million listens, then you know what's going
Experiment
on.
failed. Experiment failed.
Right.
Marcos, greatest team up in cinematic history. How are we feeling about this?
We call this an immovable force and an unstoppable object, right?
Yes, that precise. They're actually incredibly movable forces. They are these the most like dance capable bands in the scene?
So we got a small press release.
This press
about
release
this
is insane,
single,
by the way, with these fucking statements. I don't even know what to
like-
do with this.
And it's so right, those statements are in there, and then they also include like just in case you needed to know.
Yeah,
These are the members of Electric Callboy and what they do.
Yeah.
Well, that's standard, right?
sure.
They do the same thing with BABYMETAL.
That's correct.
And I've never noticed BABYMETAL. It's like one of them is our lead performer here, our lead vocalist is vocals dance, and then the other two members are dance vocals, dance vocals.
Interesting. So you have like a lead vocalist, and then you have two lead dancers who are also. This is like when you have like a vocalist and then like a guitarist vocalist.
Right.
This is nuts.
And I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, there's an argument that Electric Callboy could absolutely be the same thing.
Dance. They need to. Both of those vocalists also need to put dance next to their name. You're 100% correct.
Also, fascinating possible new window into the next era of Electric Callboy. Wigs are out. Helmets are in.
No, they've worn helmets before. Spaceman.
Oh,
Spaceman. Electric Callboy essentially merge into whatever is called of them. You know what I mean? Like they're malleable.
Yeah, so naturally disco helmets.
Yeah.
It still bothers me so much that this band is not representing Germany in Eurovision like they should be.
I wonder if
like they applied to be years ago and
Is that true?
have been snubbed ever since. Yeah, I remember when Hypa Hypa gained traction and this band had like Second Wind, Second Life, or whatever, you know, I have our new vocalist, etc., etc. That I think they did reach out to like promoters for that, and we're like, our name, Hypa Hypa in the hat. Let's throw it in there. Let's do this.
Whoever did represent Germany at Eurometal this year certainly does not have a feature with BABYMETAL. So
on God, pull up the last 20 Eurovision contestants.
Yep.
Not as good as Electric Callboy. I'll put my entire
that.
life savings on that.
I'll give you that. Serious shade to Blind Channel, the only other Eurovision band we've ever covered.
Were they?
They were representing I want to say Finland.
No. I'm talking only Germany. Only Germany.
Can we talk a little bit about the Fufu and the Ratatata?
Yeah, this is Baby Metal just calling a song unbeatable is awesome, by the way.
Bands need to have this energy moving forward.
I just love like the certainty of like, yeah, this is the shit. Like that's my sell. This is the shit.
Right. Insurmountably good. Like completely unstoppable.
This will just change you.
We are going to stomp the competition with this one singular song. Video's a lot of fun. A lot of dancing, like we mentioned earlier. A lot of lights and action. And I have to say this,
it'll be a cold day in hell when I walk away from an Electric Callboy video not having had the time of my life watching it.
I had a smile across my face for the entirety of the proceedings. It does need to be established, though. I know we mentioned earlier that Electric Callboy could put dance in their name, but I don't think anyone will ever surpass what Baby Metal does over the course of a song. Like, they are mesmerizing. One of the most entertaining acts to sit there and watch in history. Like, whether it's them just sort of like miming, having a good time in like a karaoke club setting, to their choreographed dances where they're doing something where they're doing like the metal horns and like just with little flicks of the wrist have created like one of the most compelling like numbers I've ever seen.
Another thought on Baby Metal is just like, I don't know. I think that there's an argument that they are the next great, like I feel like this could be the year of the future for like Baby Metal. This is the second time.
That's a good point.
And I don't really know what year of the collaboration as far as Baby Metal is, because I don't really understand if this is more an Electric Callboy song or more a Baby Metal song.
And I think it's split right down the middle. I'd go 50-50.
Sure, but like, is this going to end up on the next Electric Callboy album or the next Baby Metal album?
I don't know if it'll end up on either, but technically Baby Metal released this, I believe, through their YouTube channel. So like if we had to like
more subscribers,
if we had to associate it directly with one act first, possibly. I would say likely, yes.
Yeah.
Though it is crazy to learn that Electric Callboy had more monthly listeners on Spotify than Baby Metal, who I thought was an act that just sort of trounced the vast majority of the artists in our scene, just sort of with their worldwide appeal. One final thing I wanted to talk about is just how much fun this song is and how like it's so representative of how much fun this scene can be when it doesn't take itself overly serious and is willing to sort of like branch out, work with other people, engage in just fun and exciting ideas, and not be afraid to come off as a little goofy.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Moving on, Margos. Nothing Nowhere have dropped new single, John Wayne, I Wanna Be a Cowboy.
I wanna be a cowboy, but I sleep too late. I stayed up all night watching all my fights on my phone. I wanna be a John Wayne. I wanna be a religion.
New album Hell or High Water is out June 28th. It will mark the artist's second new full-length album this year, following Dark Magic from earlier this February. Marcus, that's 2 full-length albums in the span of like 4.5 months. Insane. Nothing Nowhere currently hold 1.2 million monthly listeners on Spotify. And that's all I got, Marcus. There's no press release for this or nothing. Nothing Nowhere is currently a solo artist after having separated with Fueled by Ramen after the release of Dark Void from last year.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I definitely want to touch on here is you say second album this calendar year, but if you go back 365 days,
we're talking 3 albums in the span of like about approximately a year.
And to me, Dark Magic felt more like we have a lot of ideas, let's just get them out of our system.
Sure.
And this feels like the spiritual successor to Avoid Eternal as far as like what is probably a categorically what I would consider the next Nothing Nowhere album.
You know, that's
Dark
interesting.
Magic to me didn't really feel like, it felt like a lot of ideas, didn't really feel like an album.
I mean, I feel like you're having a lot of sort of preemptive critiques of an album of whose track listing we haven't even gotten yet. You know what I mean? Like you're basing a lot off of just this one single versus an album that you've heard in full.
Sure, maybe. This is more a context clues as far as it feels like And granted, like I know we had like the Knight and the Shadow Wizard Money Gang stuff.
This feels
Dark
actually very
Magic.
similar to that to me, like almost like two parallels. You know what I mean? Like we're sort of approaching each release with its own very like defined aesthetic and personality type.
Perhaps this to me feels like something that's been baking for a lot longer.
Okay. I think you feel that way maybe because at the very least this video felt slightly, I don't know, maybe it's just this feels like a better song than anything off of Dark Magic, which is an album that I quite enjoyed.
Maybe, but it also feels, I think Dark Magic, the turnaround between announcement and release was much shorter than what will ultimately be. Like that was shorter than a month, whereas this is just over a month, right? So that to me, again, speaks as to what maybe this, what I would like this to be. Because Dark Magic is, while it was an album I
being given a little
enjoyed,
more like care in theory.
I enjoyed Dark Magic. I don't expect to spend much time considering it at the end of the year as far as like will I look back on 2024 for Dark Magic or for this one? I expect to look back on it more for Hell or High Water.
Or the third album that'll release it
potentially
early October. How iconic does the emo cowboy feel already?
That's why I'm saying it feels so big.
Okay.
Like this feels like we were trying to really pin down the aesthetic, and then meanwhile being like, I also wanted to do like a night thing this time around. And
You're
then
saying on the last album he grilled, but on this album he cooked.
Last album we like freestyled, we grilled. This is like in the kitchen, Gordon Ramsay style.
Yeah,
making like filet mignon.
What's the name of the guy from the Bear? What's his name? Carmi? Carmi
Fieri.
Can't believe you haven't seen that show.
I've seen 2 episodes.
Separate conversation.
The bear is in it.
Indeed. So I really enjoyed this music video. It's simplistic but effective by simply taking our character and placing him in appropriate locations, but the mood of it all sort of throwing off the energy, throwing off the vibe.
It's important to establish this version of Nothing Nowhere. Like that's why I like that it's simple. I just need to feel how
like we're
sad
framing this album
is,
in a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah. How sad this clown boy is.
So sad, but so catchy and filled with some incredible
lines. What's your favorite line? What's the line?
I mean, the line that sticks out to me is, staying up late watching fights at a Walmart on my phone. Walmart fights on my phone.
Staying up until 5 a.m. watching Walmart fights on my phone. It's
incredible
something
line.
along
Absolutely
those lines.
Incredible line. Just a beauty. Something. Yeah. I don't know if personally relatable, but completely understandable.
Yeah, I mean, you've had those days, Sam. You've told me as much.
Boston Manor have hit us with new track, Heat Me Up. New album, Sundiver, announced for September 6th via Sharp Tone Records. It's the follow-up and second chapter of the story that began with 2022's Datura and will feature previous singles, Sliding Doors and Container. Vocalist Henry Cox had this to say on the new song. Heat Me Up ended up being the first track we finished on the album. We'd gone down to Wellwyn Garden City.
Naturally.
It sounds like a level in Sonic the Hedgehog, where we were going to record the album to write and do some pre-production. It was actually our day off. It was a blistering hot day and we had nothing to do. So we had a barbecue in the garden and wrote a song. Sometimes tunes take months to write, but this just flew right out in an afternoon. It's a song about being utterly obsessed with someone and being grateful for what you have. Imagine you go to a barbecue and you have to work.
These bands...
I thought we were grilling. I thought we were cracking open some cold ones. Suddenly I'm plugging into the amp.
This is the trouble, right? It's when you close your eyes and picture a British band,
working class band.
Grilling does not come to mind. That's not.
I didn't even know. I didn't know
activity.
They grilled in the UK.
So they start doing it, and they're like, "I don't even know what this is. Let's write a song. Let's get back to what we know."
blood sausage? Like, what the fuck did they throw on a grill over there?
It's not problematic, but that's bordering on it somehow.
That's not problematic. You can poke fun at the British. That's
They
legal.
eat sausage?
That being said, I love Boston Manor. I don't even think of them as British. That's how much I like them. And on the album, Sundiver is the culmination of 2 years' work and 4 years of planning. Going into the pandemic, we knew our next record would be a double album released in 2 parts. The first, a short, shadowy, noiry electronic record set over one night, and the second, a sprawling rock record that documents the following day. Both albums are products of their environment. We made Datura in the dead of winter in a windowless studio complex that mostly just produced techno. We'd enter before the sun rose and leave long after it set, basically never seeing sunlight hard. We made Sundiver in Welwyn Garden City, stage 2, over 2 summers. We barbecued every day. Marcus, every day they're barbecued. This is from Touring America. They brought it back.
Right.
They brought it back.
This is the dangers of touring America for too
also
long.
cultural appropriation.
Prolonged exposure.
We would walk across the road to a meadow and just take naps in the sunshine when we weren't recording. We've essentially been working on this album and building up to it since the pandemic. We were obsessed with trying to make a record that felt like blistering sunshine, or that wavy, hazy horizon you get when the pavement is super hot. But we didn't want it to sound happy or major key. Sundiver is by far Boston Manor's best and most ambitious record to date, and we couldn't be happier with it. I really hope our fans love it as much as we do. Finally, the band will be playing a string of dates and festivals in Europe later this June, and they currently stand at a little over 500,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. Marcus, you mentioned earlier Baby Metal coming out saying, hey, this track is unbeatable. Boston Manor coming out and saying this is the best fucking album you've ever heard in your whole goddamn life.
I love it. There's so much to digest here.
A lot to digest here.
So it's called Sundiver.
Correct.
I think a lot of us were expecting and hoping for a Datura Dusk or Dawn. I forget.
You know
which
what you
one we
needed?
had.
You needed like a pre here, you know, kind of like post-human survival next gen. You needed like, you know, whatever. Something, the Manor, Datura, the Manor, you know. So you would have that sort of synergy, that connectivity to them. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over this, but I understand what you're saying.
This, to me, feels like a more intentional version of what happened between Welcome to the Neighborhood.
Sure.
And then Glue.
Yeah.
And, like, it's... I don't know. Like, that's what it reminds me of, because... Welcome to the Neighborhood, again, like a noir-y looking album cover.
Mm-hmm.
Sound as well, just a very dark record. And then I remember when we reviewed Glue, which mind you was like my album of the year, one of my critiques of that
Deserved.
was that it felt like shining too much light on what this band was and what they stood for and what I wanted them to.
Interesting.
And I
Okay.
remember being like initially sort of, it was off-putting to me because it was like when someone pulled the shades in like the darkest room you've ever been
Right, like
in.
you hissed
And it's
when the
like,
sunlight hit you.
That's what it felt like listening to that for the first time, seeing the artwork for that. And it's a similar feeling here, seeing like the all white album cover from Boston Manor. But obviously this is the second go around. And also knowing that like we've been leading up to what was, regardless of whether this band, whether we knew what it was called, what it was going to be, we knew it was going to be like the light version because Datura was the dusk version, right? So it was always going to be dawn. We just didn't know what. We didn't have many other details.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot here to chew on though. Like the fact that this band always knew that they were going to do a double album next, which is why for me it's like a lot of like things are starting to click, and I'm like, okay, so maybe it is an intentional version of what sort of happened by maybe accident between Welcome to the Neighborhood and Glue, and this is this band sort of making an even better version of that potential. I'm really curious to see how it plays out. I've been enamored so far with all of the singles.
Almost like like you said earlier, they revisited in a concept that they flirted with, maybe intentional or not, and then did it more methodically this time around. I think the most interesting aspect of this for me personal is like the meta of how it was recorded. This idea that they approached Datura by strictly working at night and almost sort of existing.
It's the musical equivalent of method acting.
Yeah, precisely
Yeah.
correct. And then, alternatively, this album barbecues, naps in the sunshine, and so on and so forth.
It's just a
Though that being
cold
said,
ale.
do you feel like that always comes across? Because I think of a track like Sliding Doors and how like gritty that is.
They said it. They don't want this to. They don't want the impression to be that this is a happy album, which I really.
You're right. My reading comprehension is
appreciate-
terrible, actually.
Like mentally for me, that really opens me up to this record more before its arrival, because again, same thing. Like when they released Glue after Welcome to the Neighborhood, and I know I've made this comparison a couple of different times. Again, it felt like they just pulled the curtain back and the room flooded with sunshine and it hurt your eyes and all that. This feels like someone telling you, hey, in about like an hour, I'm going to come in and like just pull that curtain again.
And I'm going to give you one of the best Boston Manor albums you've ever heard in your whole life.
But like it gives me like the time, like with all these singles, the album artwork, the how the band feels about it. Hey, it's not a happy album. That's like me mentally being able to prepare and being like, all right, I should probably turn on my table side lamp and like, I should probably like just slightly open the blinds and like let some light in before letting it all in when the person comes and pulls the curtain again, when Boston Manor does that again.
So it's fair to say you are extraordinarily hyped to hear this record.
Yes.
I think all of the singles have been very strong thus far. I do wish that Heat Me Up had been given a visual treatment, but I'll never write off the fact that may not happen by the time
Next
this episode goes live.
Also,
Finally.
Wellwyn Garden sounds like
Wellwyn
a
Gardens.
Pokemon city.
Okay,
more
same
than
fucking
anything
difference,
else.
bro. You're splitting here. Same difference.
Sounds like where you can go get great balls.
We're on the same page, though, Marcos. Last news story before we get into it. Bilmuri has released a new song, Talking to Your Ghost.
So I be talking to you ghost.
New album, American Motorsports, is out June 28th. The album will contain previous singles Empty Handed featuring Dylan Marlowe, Blindsided, Better Hell, Thick Boy, and All Gas featuring Mitchell Tenpenny. It's the follow-up to 2022's Goblin Hours. He'll be opening for Sleep Token later this November in the UK, Europe. Bilmuri is currently cranking out approximately 688,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. Marcos, I saw that number and I was taken aback slightly. I'm deeply impressed with how popular Bilmuri has become.
These recent singles, like I think Better Hell alone has easily crossed like 3 million, 4 million streams, probably more. I don't know. These new singles have clicked for
They're
people.
connecting. Yes.
They're connecting.
They're finding their audience. Marcos, speaking of finding your audience, the dichotomy of theoretically watching Bilmuri in an American flag shirt ripped open while he's performing his country songs before we transition to Sleep Token is going to be one of the most hard cuts between direct support and the lead act on a tour we've ever seen.
I obviously would like to be at that show for many reasons.
We all would.
But
it should be live streamed to the world.
Top of the list. Like the biggest reason why is that reason. It's like I want to see people react to Bilmuri. Personally, the way that I react to Bilmuri is that I like fall to my knees and I just start bowing and just showing thanks.
You worship?
I worship. I can't believe I
can't believe you accidentally sort of like got there, Marcos. Who is Bilmuri, Sleep Token's opener on the Rituals tour?
Who is Bilmuri? An American, we know that much from a lot of context visually.
That's precisely correct, Marcus. Especially this music video where he's posted up in front of what can only be described as the tank of farming equipment in a wide open field while he hard poses multiple times before eventually busting out a violin and running around with it in one of the most
A violin
grabbing
that is
music videos I've ever seen in my whole life.
engulfed in flames.
I think what's so incredible about Bilmuri is that you watch something like the Baby Metal Electric Callboy collaboration, which has flashing lights, a huge disco ball, people, like a slight narrative, huge production value, and then Bilmuri, who's just putting suntan lotion on while in a crop circle, and you're like, God damn, this hits just as hard.
He's got the AirPods in, clearly just trying to remember like what to lip sync. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
It's a fun theory.
I did have the question while we were discussing
Go
this
ahead.
and how like just fun and great Bilmuri is.
This is the place for questions.
Is this someone that like potentially Electric Callboy is looking at next?
Oof.
And how wonderful would that collaboration be?
You'd love to see it. I mean, I do think that there is now a small market here, like a niche little, not even niche actually, a big corner of the scene that could be a little more laid back, loose, fun, good time, and that these collaborations are bound to start happening as long as, we see the fruits of the ones that have already transpired. Like that Baby Metal Electric Callboy one takes off, and then suddenly they go, hey, what other opportunities are out there? What other audiences can we like come across? Can we synergize? What can we like, just like,
Well,
what's
I mean,
the cross in that like chart that's just perfect for us?
In the case of someone like Electric Callboy, they clearly seem to be ramping up into a new era. And take a look at that last Electric Callboy album that had 5, 6, 7 features, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to fill out the rest. I'm looking at a Bilmuri who's up there, shaking hands with, Sleep Token at this point.
That's a good point as well. Bring Sleep Token in. Can we get that
who else
collab
is on
as
it?
well?
Mitchell Tenpenny, which is a fake name.
Mitchell Tenpenny is not a fake name. It might very well be a fake name, though.
Mitchell Tenpenny's like that feels like an alter ego for Bilmuri.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like Bilmuri featuring Bilmuri, but you can't.
And
say
or Bill Murray's real name is Mitchell Tenpenny.
well, it's
Right?
not.
It's actually he's
Johnny
featuring
Frank.
on Shh, quiet. At a moment, in this video he headbangs to like a breakdown, and it's like weirdly nostalgically fulfilling.
Yeah, there's like you also like we have the violin out and you drop. Also hilarious, that's the only instrument that you see on screen.
Yep.
This entire video, like guitars, drumming is happening. And yeah, like you've got the violin
Those
down
are just
low,
the noises the farm machine was
and
making.
you're almost doing like a crab course stance. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Very
It's
nostalgic.
absolutely beautiful. Bill Murray, absolutely fucking beautiful. Marcos, so all that being said, we have prepared for you 2 reviews.
The breakdown.
We will start with the surprise drop of the week. No one saw it coming. We thought, is this album ever even going to come out? And then suddenly, just out of nowhere, Ollie Sykes, dressed like a little maid kitten, holding a sign that says Next Gen, May 24th. Marcos, let's get into it.
Yeah, day has finally come. Posthuman, Next Gen by Bring Me the Horizon. This is the Sheffield UK outfit's 7th studio album, released suddenly on the 24th of May via RCA Records. Posthuman, Next Gen, consists of 16 tracks and is the long-awaited second installment in the band's Posthuman series, following 2020's Posthuman Survival Horror EP. I wanted to jog your memory, so I took the liberty of outlining a complete timeline of events to date as it relates to the Posthuman era, Sam. So
Yeah.
Buckle in. This is going to be a bit long. 1,429 days ago, on the 25th of June 2020, the band announces a project titled Posthuman, which they detailed would be a collection of 4 EPs released throughout the next year, which, when combined, would create a full album. 127 days after that, on the 30th of October, 2020, Posthuman Survival Horror is released. For me, this marks the start of the 365-day countdown.
Edge on the
That
clock.
would bring us 3 more EPs.
Yeah.
Moving on, a somewhat concerning 321 days following the release of Survival Horror 1.
Yep.
And with only 44 days left to drop the 3 other promised Posthuman EPs.
Technically still a lot of time on the clock.
On the 16th of September 2021, a new song titled Die For You, presumed lead single of Posthuman 2, is released. A blink and you miss it 293 days after that. On the 6th of July 2022, you guessed it, Sam, second single Strangers drops. Then, an excruciating wait of 26,179,140 seconds later, on the 4th of May 2023, Pilots, third single, Lost, is released.
Incredible.
Actually, pretty soon after that, on the 1st of June 2023, fourth single, Amen, releases. That has the guy from Glassjaw. It's got fucking Lil Uzi Vert.
His name is Daryl Palumbo, but yes.
Well, it doesn't matter. The wheels are really moving now. On the 10th of June 2023, Bring Me announces Posthuman Next Gen, the second installment of the now fabled Posthuman series, and that it would release on the 15th of September 2023. Naturally, on the 24th of August 2023, Next Gen is delayed indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
13th of October 2023, fifth single, Dark Side, releases. September 11th, 2001, December 22nd, 2023, keyboardist and producer Jordan Fish exits the band after a decade. Gone but not forgotten.
It's the
Oh,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Real one's got it.
Yeah, I didn't
Real
have the
one's
book
got
out.
it.
That's the problem.
Audio listeners, I apologize for making a visual joke during this part.
5th of January 2024, 841 days removed from the release of lead single Die For You, we get a taste of freshly fishless BMTH on 6th and final single Kool-Aid. Finally, on the 23rd of May, 11 hours and 30 minutes before what would become its official, actual, real, tangible Pinch Me I'm Dreaming concrete release date, the band announces that Posthuman 2 would drop digitally at midnight, 12 a.m. on the 24th of May, 2024. So to summarize, Posthuman Next Gen arrived 252 days after its expected initial release date of September 15th, 2023. I wanted to include this next bit because I think that a little bit of frame of reference, right?
Sure.
So
Perspective, if you will.
yeah, the delay of Next Gen from the original date into better perspective, so to speak. So the last Day to Remember album, You're Welcome, came out on March 5th, 2021, which was 466 days after its original promised release date of November 25th, 2019, an album that was delayed only 1 week before its release.
For what reason?
They didn't like the art.
Okay, continue.
That was a wait of 214 days longer than we actually experienced with Next Gen.
I want everyone to close their eyes right now and picture Marcos in front of some sort of pin board connecting red strings from dates to songs to bands to fishes, all to give us what we've just experienced right here, Marcos.
Yes.
Back to the timeline of events.
Right now, May 24th, Posthuman Next Gen is here. We've heard it. We're ready to fucking talk about it, are we not? I also wanted to add just
I'm so ready.
real quick, a couple more notes here. Top 10 Statues and NA are the only tracks from the new bunch. The new bunch being all other singles that weren't Kool-Aid.
Right.
Those are the only 2 tracks that feature Jordan Fish, Top 10 Statues and NA. He's got a writing credit, production credit, whatever it may be. And I also wanted to mention that Daisuke from Pale Dusk, their guitarist, their producer, co-wrote and helped produce the following 9 total tracks in Utopia, Kool-Aid, Top 10 Statues, Limousine, Dark Side, A Bullet, NA, Rip, and Amen. So a pretty sizable chunk of this record.
So I just want to sort of connect this thread for people who are listening as well. Daisuke of Pale Dusk and Jordan Fish have production credits on the same songs as well.
Yes. Yeah. So for example, Amen has both Fish, has Die. So I don't know. That's
right.
really
In
it.
addition to NA and Top 10
yeah.
Statues that cried blood, I just thought that was an interesting thing to notate as well. Marcos, couple more things before we get into it?
Yeah, Alyssa, frontman Ollie Sykes' wife, is responsible for the cover art, which I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that the physical release, the saga continues. The physical release will come out September 27th of 2024. That's when you can expect your vinyl.
Just to stop and touch on that a little bit, because, connecting this thread as well. So alongside a new physical release that they just announced is a little statue of the sort of like monster girl that Alyssa Sykes created for the artwork. So that art has already began to take on like a secondary life of its own.
Yeah, I think they also shared like what is technically the back of the album, the back of the vinyl, which is the back of this girl's head. Mm-hmm. It's got a whole bunch of like PS2 graphic stuff. I think you
right, and the whole
Twitter.
CD
It's very neat.
is sort of structured like a PlayStation 1 disc or something like that, which we've seen other bands do before, and it's done very well here. Marcos, one other thing I wanted to touch on kind of going into this, a big concern from fans that was addressed by the band in the lead up to this was that every song had already been heard from the EP, right? So part of the reason initially why it was delayed, or the reason that was kind of like given in tandem with the delay, was that we needed more time to flesh out the album. And this was straight from Bring Me the Horizon, because we didn't want only singles on the album. We wanted more songs that you hadn't heard. And ultimately, we've ended up with 16 tracks. So we have, and while some are worth noting, interludes of sorts or intros, 10 tracks in addition to the 6 singles. Essentially getting one of the biggest, quote-unquote, EPs, which is sort of what we expected this was going to be, in human history.
Yeah, so important to remember when this album was initially announced.
EP the size of an LP.
Inflation.
Precisely correct, yes.
We weren't told what the track listing would be, right? So we didn't know. We expected the singles, right?
A lot of bands doing this now, by the way, and it's starting to drive me a little insane.
Yeah, we'll touch on that at a later point. But I think the way that this band explained what this eventually turned into can be explained in another way, which was that Jordan Fish, his departure did not suddenly happen, and I think that it was something that was planned
or expected
to be announced at a later date, et cetera, et cetera. So you initially announced this album. I think this is why the delay initially happens, because then you probably want to release a bunch more music that might not have Jordan Fish's name attached, potentially. I don't really know. It's hard to say. So that's why I look at a track like NA, a track like Top 10 Statues, and I'm like, okay, would those have been the other 2-3 tracks, on this EP that really made it an EP, and everything else, all these OSTs, all this other stuff, is what came together after the fact in the 200 something days it's been since that delay. And this is why it ended up being so lengthy. Not maybe that this band was doing damage control as far as we didn't want it to be all the singles you've already heard, but maybe more so, well, we wanted to just go write a bunch of songs that with a new team of people that you know, we still want to include everything on one album, but we don't want to just live in the past either.
Right, like in theory, some of these songs could have been being saved for the follow-up to whatever this was going to be, right? But we've decided to sort of like take them and sort of like combine them into one, obviously much longer, bigger experience than initially we thought we were going to be receiving. Marcus, there's so many places to come at this from. Let's start with the singles. Kool-Aid, Dark Side, Lost Strangers, Amen, and Die For You. I think one of the most fascinating aspects of this album is how the track listing and the flow of things have sort of reframed these songs in my mind after having lived with some of them for so long, right? So it's funny. I would say that in theory, I was surprised that Die For You made the cut because it feels like an antique at this point. But hearing it in the context of this album, I would say it's one of the tracks that makes the most amount of sense in terms of its inclusion.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that, in the sense that I'm really happy that the band didn't put 5 singles at the top of this album that we've already heard and then asked us to then listen to a bunch of new tracks at the end. So the reason I like that
almost
is,
like an EP with 8 B-sides that would seemingly feel attached.
So a bunch of decisions here I appreciate. Die For You, the oldest of the single, the last of the singles in the track listing, extremely deep in the record at track 15. I like that because it is also the song that many people have probably spent the most of time away from at this point.
Yeah.
So it's a cool refresher at the very end.
Yes.
Yeah. And then additionally, another decision I like here is just placement all across the board. You've got a wonderful transition from Utopia into Kool-Aid. And that's where I really start to pick up on how incredibly well paced this record is. And a lot of it is due in part to the placement of the singles. So by the time you've heard 2 new tracks, you get into Dark Side, which is a great little familiar, honestly, what feels like the most forgotten of all these singles. You know, a familiar feeling before heading into 3 more tracks that you're less familiar with, into a track like Lost, which is just, again, one of the coolest things, in my opinion, this band's ever done. And it just has an immaculate energy to it. And again, that's where like pace really comes in. So this entire album just fucking moves.
I'm still listening, but there is something that you just said, and I wanted to spot check it because I thought I remembered this. Dark Side is the biggest single from this album with 54 million streams.
So I don't know why that feels so surprising to me.
It feels surprising as well, but I will say this.
The reason I think that, just to complete that thought, is I feel like I don't hear anyone talk about it, at least in
There's a
our
reason for it,
circles.
though. There's a reason for it. I think Strangers and Dark Side are the throne of this album, which is to say that they're songs that I think are a little less spicy, a little more flavorless, and they're songs that other bands would kill to be able to craft. But Bring Me the Horizon does effortlessly. The problem is that I think they do it so effortlessly. At this point, I'm a little bored by a good Bring Me the Horizon song.
I was thinking to myself, yeah, and that's why it makes...
And Dark Side is kind of that. It's a little of the... It feels to me like one of the blandest, but that would also explain why it ends up being one of the ones that takes off.
Yeah, well, I think that applies most to maybe Strangers, right? That is the song that is...
They're two sides of the same coin, I think.
The most simple track on here. But it makes me really appreciate tracks like, honestly, Limousine, for example, is probably the best example I can find here to sort of make this point, which is Bring Me the Horizon, find the hardest path to the destination they're always going to end up at possible.
Okay.
So, like, just when you think they're going to take the right that it's telling them to on the GPS, they take 2 lefts and take a back road to like the same destination.
Yeah, I watched the video for this.
Right. Is there? I don't know. I'm so lost.
It's like them driving through like a kind of spooky Resident Evil, Silent Hill
This is
PS2
a real thing?
generated town. Yeah. So they drop lyric videos for every song that didn't have an official music video, which was essentially all the singles before this dropped. And some of them are a little more creative than well, they're all fairly creative, but some of them are a little more involved than others. Like the animation is a little heavier.
Compelling.
And Limousine is one of those tracks where it's like you're in theoretically like a limousine and you're just driving through like this very spooky like PlayStation generated era graphic town.
Okay, I love that. I didn't watch that, but it
Not to deviate
they get it
completely
across.
from whatever point you were making right there.
But yeah, I listen to a song like that and I'm like, you've got like a knockout single here, but like adding all that weird, silly, fun shit is really what ultimately separates a band like Bring Me the Horizon from the rest. Like I said, they know that it's only going to take them like 1 mile and 2 right turns and a left to get there, but they make it they get so creative with the pathing that it ends up resulting in tracks like Utopia, tracks like Limousine, absolute fucking standouts on this
And
album.
there is a stark difference between that and songs like Dark Side and Strangers, but I think that's kind of what's so fascinating about this album is that there is a lot of variety to be found across this, something that I think isn't dramatically different than the last Posthuman album. And for what it's worth, most Bring Me the Horizon albums, at least in the last like 6 or 7 years, going from Ammo to Posthuman to this.
Right. So hold that thought. Just to kind of finish the single talk, it really makes me appreciate when it's all said and done, hearing all these new tracks, seeing the placement of these singles, the tracks that didn't quite work for me, like Strangers, less so Die For You, a track that I do enjoy, but like it's been so long. I think they are so necessary on an album like this.
I think,
and I love that they were included. I love where they are.
I think it helps us feel extremely fleshed out. So even though you have something that is what I would say incredibly straightforward, like a Dark Side, it being bundled between A Bullet With My Name On and Limousine sort of makes it more interesting than it otherwise is.
And then Strangers coming after probably one of the biggest anthems this band's ever written and lost.
And then it's Evil
Rip,
Twin, R.I.P. Dustcore Remix.
The weirdest fucking song on the record. And I mean that in a great way.
The weirdest song on the record? We're going to sit here and look at OST Pussy and call that?
We can go a lot of places with that. So moving on, the fact that, so where did we leave off? What did that?
You were talking about, you said you had to finish up your thoughts about the singles.
I told you to hold what?
You told me to hold on, and then you were going to finish up your thoughts about the singles. I was just talking about the way Dark Side was sandwiched between two dramatically different
I'm talking way before
songs.
that. I'm saying...
You're talking about even before that.
I said I wanted to finish single talk before we got into the last point you had made.
The last point that I had made, I believe, was that Dark Side was sandwiched between two staggeringly different songs.
Dumb. He's so dumb. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. And I'm too brainless
Let's
to
drop
remember.
it and move forward. I just say we break and continue onward, Marcos. I think what I'd like to talk about next are the OSTs, which are essentially the intros and interludes. So we start with Dream Seeker, right? Which is... probably I think the least like fleshed out of all of the interludes. Like it's just like a very quiet little intro.
So. I think that they do a lot of cool stuff with Dig It, which isn't really an OST song, but it's the closing track on here, and it's got like it's got a bunch of like audio logs from this
it's
character.
Presented as an audio log, right?
Yeah. Well, right. But like there's this they're fleshing it out with this character called M8 Mate,
sure,
which is awesome, who's like, hey, thanks for logging into your fucking Dream Seeker, you've got 107 billion files and one audio log.
So we've threaded it is what you're saying,
right,
so while it may have felt like not critically important to the proceedings, we've made it so in the final track,
right? And then Mate comes back at the very end of like that 6-minute track that has like 2 minutes of silence in there at some point, but like I wish that character would have shown up a lot earlier in here, on a Dream Seeker, for example, which does feel a little wasted because it's ultimately only like a 30-second track. And it's just like a little bit of dressing before getting into Utopia. And honestly, I could have just seen them just tacking that onto a Utopia. It didn't really need its own OST track. And I mentioned that only because of how much I really like the other OST tracks. So when I hear that initially, I get like a little worried about what those might be on first listen. And then I also think it makes it so that Dream Seeker really just is a weird green thumb. It sticks out like a sore thumb, rather.
A sore thumb, not a green thumb. Yes.
Well,
it's not. It's not a song that's good at gardening.
It's a song that it's a sore thumb because then at that point I look at a track like Spiritual, which is the other OST.
You're right. It's strong.
Middle,
it's overshadowed by those other tracks. So Spiritual, I would say, is probably my favorite of the OSTs. Even though I appreciate the absurdity of PUSSE.
Say it. Say its name.
Pussy.
Say it louder.
Pussy. Stop. I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to. This is the kid show.
Stop.
Is it? No. So I appreciate the OSTs. I like how they sort of help the flow of the record, and I think they are nice bonuses to what are all the more full length tracks on this record.
Well, and like the last thing I'll add there is I really appreciate that they exist because I think it adds a little bit more. I think it fleshes out what the essence of Posthuman is and what that is supposed to mean much better, and it.
That's an interesting...
And as a result, I'm more invested in this series. I'm pulled back in because it had been so long that I felt like I wasn't invested anymore. Like this could have just been called Next Gen. It didn't even need the Posthuman moniker.
I want to touch.
Title.
I want to pause and I want to touch on that thought that you just shared. The theme of these records. So
yeah.
Ollie Sykes made a post today. I'm not sure if it was a personal post or it was like in speaking with Karing or something. And he was talking a little bit about how if you're willing to dig and pay attention, that you can see the conceptual nature of this record and how this is tied to the first album, and what that concept is that's trying to be that we're trying to get across with these albums. Do you feel like you have an idea of what that is? Because I feel like you just did sort of share that you're picking up on the overall theme or concept.
I don't have the most concrete idea of what all
I have
of
a
this
general
is and
idea.
what it means. Go ahead.
So I think that Posthuman is sort of the fruition of this idea or feeling of our protagonist, let's say in theory, Ollie Sykes, or in practice or literally, losing faith in humanity and like trying to find the meaning in existence through whether it's substances or love or sex or religion. And still by the end of this album, Next Gen, feeling empty inside and then choosing potentially with Closer Dig It to embrace that emptiness. So it's this journey to find a way to fill an emptiness that you feel from seeing the horrors of the world around you and then not finding it in anything, and then just sort of ending up feeling as if you have to give in to this negativity, this sort of like black hole that's been built inside of you. That's sort of the idea that I think. Yeah. Like not to say that I ever think this album is directly saying it, even though in some instances there are ways that I could put together that narrative myself through the lyrics and the general themes of the songs across both this and Survival Horror.
No, I like that. I think that's a pretty good summation of maybe what this is. I also look at Posthuman sometimes less as a narrative thing and more sonically what it means to be posthuman, in the sense that it is the essence of who Bring Me the Horizon are, to be genre fluid, to bend genres, to in theory like have variety. Like a human is one thing, right? What does it mean to be posthuman? Like I sonically appreciate that Bring Me the Horizon, even without a star contributor in someone like a Jordan Fish. Granted, I know that he's still all over this album in a sense. Even on these new tracks, continue to be a shining example of variety, of pushing genre limitations, borders, whatever they may be. This is there are no boundaries. The sky is the limit still for this band creatively.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a little
I think
bit
that's
of
what
that.
it means to be post-human in a sense.
Are there? Okay, so you're still talking from like a thematic sort of like conceptual nature, sort of the idea of being post-human is that it's almost like existing as like a consciousness separate of your body that is able to sort of engage with all of these different ideas and thoughts.
Which is where I think things like spiritual, dream seeker, like some of like the verbiage comes into play, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Marcus, let's talk about some of the big moments on this album. Track 7, A Bullet with My Name On, featuring Under Oath, tasks Under Oath with singing the line, "If Jesus Christ returns, we'll kill that fucker twice." Marcos, now, with people who aren't overly familiar with Under Oath, that band's inception was that of a Christian metalcore band, a moniker that they have since divorced themselves, I would say, thoroughly with this feature, maybe most thoroughly with this feature.
This is like Bring Me the Horizon making Under Oath say that line specifically is like in a gangster movie or TV show where like
it's like proving
you're not wearing a wire by like shooting that man.
That's precisely correct. Yeah.
They also task them with saying kiss the something.
Yeah.
Kiss not the pussy.
No, not that. No, that's for
that far.
That's for a later song.
There's some other lines in there. It's a huge moment, right? Including Under Oath in this.
Right.
And for me, it's a huge moment for a lot of reasons, but it's a cool reminder that above all else, Bring Me the Horizon are still just a student of the game. This is the biggest band in our scene at the moment who's not Paramore. Who is Paramore?
21 Pilots, who we'll be discussing in a little bit.
21 Pilots, My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, bands that have
fair
like...
to say they're the biggest band in metalcore, right? Currently, Bring Me the Horizon.
Yeah. Biggest band in our scene that is in the fucking emo trinity, and whoever comes in and out of that, depending on the year you're in.
There's like 7 asterisks there, but I think people understood what you're trying to say.
Right. And for them to still go out and include someone like Under Oath, which they don't have to do, to include someone like Daryl of Glassjaw, which they don't have to do, reminds me that, like, above all else, again, this band is just... Same with, like, Danny Filth back in, like, the Ammo days.
Well, I think these are examples of artists that I think Bring Me the Horizon has a lot of respect for and which used to work with.
Right.
Under Oath and, Glassjaw in particular are
probably bands
artists with very established careers.
Sure. Probably bands
Respected
that inspired
careers.
Bring Me the Horizon
Exactly,
back in the day.
Youngblood.
And I love the fact that, like, they're always eager to collaborate with artists of many different sizes.
Machine Gun Kelly,
cultural relevance,
Youngblood, Yonaka, Static Dress.
Sure.
Like, the list goes on with Bring Me. It's crazy the artists that they branch out and include in their projects.
Right, but like the cultural relevance of it all, like, sure, you could have featured Spirit Box here in their place, but no, you go out and get Under Oath. Something like that is what I mean. And granted, like, I still want to ultimately see a Spirit Box collaboration, but I just love that
You're saying they didn't just choose the hottest of the hot, though. To be fair, they did include Lil Uzi Vert, which I think is the biggest name pull that you possibly ever could have got. That's the budget for a feature.
But they could have gone and... But I think they could have gone and grabbed more. And granted, Aurora, by the way, is like... easily clears 10 million streams on Spotify, if you're not aware.
Is that true? I'm not overly familiar with Aurora.
Artist.
Yeah.
I'm talking like probably near the billions with single song streams.
You think Bring Me the Horizon probably has a lot of leverage to work with who they want, but then there are probably a lot of other artists that respect Bring Me the Horizon and want to work with them as well.
Well, that's part of it, is what I mean. It's like this band will actively seek out people they want to work with and it doesn't matter who they are. Bands 20 years in their career, 10 years in their career.
And you see it with the way they tour as well,
200
too.
million monthly fucking listeners. And granted, I understand that Under Oath is by no means a small band. Glassjaw, by no means a small band. But obviously, in comparison to a band like Bring Me the Horizon, who are currently riding a peak,
Also within a space.
it's a different stratosphere.
There are a lot of people who could be fans of Bring Me the Horizon who have never heard of Under Oath or Glassjaw. I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. Other big moments on this album. What are they? Is it Kool-Aid? Because isn't Kool-Aid a song that you and I both had a weird feeling for when it initially drops, and now I look at that and I'm like, well, that's the song off Posthuman.
You know what it is about Kool-Aid? And I don't know that I agree with you there, but why don't you
It's one of the songs for sure.
bank that thought, because we did have a question from one of our patrons regarding that. I think Kool-Aid is a good example of sort of a slight change in the style of production from Bring Me the Horizon that I don't know that I was overly ready for. I think that I was very enamored with the style of production that we got on like Lost, which is,
Yes.
I would argue, maybe overly produced in a way that I really appreciate. And then Kool-Aid feels a little more scaled back. It's a little, it feels, at least it's crafted to feel significantly more raw. And I think at its, at the onset of the first time that I heard that track, it felt a little shoddy to me in some capacity, and now I've gone back, like you said, and I certainly appreciate it a lot more than I do. But again, there's a lot of in context that happens around this album, that the versatility of like styles and sort of I'm not just talking about like genre styles, but like production styles.
A very welcome amount, right?
Yeah, it just makes this album very exciting. Like it flows incredibly well despite being so dramatically different from track to track. And I think there's something really neat about that. And I'll also say this, I just think that this, maybe by comparison to Posthuman Survival Horror, feels it somewhat more like it has more variety to it. And I think I appreciate that it's weirder. It's just a little weirder.
So
like
on
it
that
takes
thought,
a few more swings than that last album did.
That is the only album in this band's discography that I have any interest in discussing during a Posthuman 2 review. In the sense that, okay, if this is the Posthuman series, let's start actually looking at what that means. Now you have one EP, one album. Again, that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about Ammo or Sempiternal.
Survival
How do you
Horror.
compare this to fucking There Is a Hell? I don't.
Survival
This
Horror.
is such a different band from that time.
Survival Horror feels safer when compared to this album. This feels much more experimental.
Is it safer because of the length? Because I think you take a look
No, I
at like
think
that Baby Metal song Kingslayer, and I wouldn't call that safe.
I would call it safe in comparison to some of these OSTs, to the Dustcore remix, or even to something like, I would say Amen, even though that's a song that people gleamed onto fairly quickly just because of how heavy it is. But I think it is kind of an extremely chaotic song, and I don't think it's as... I think that the structure of the songs on Posthuman Survival Horror were much easier to take in than these songs on this album. Even something like Top 10 Statues That Cried Blood. Like, I think there's a lot of chaos to this record that is probably off-putting to people who might enjoy the more straight ahead style of Strangers and Dark Side that could have brought them into this album, or having heard maybe a couple songs from Survival Horror that could have gotten them excited to hear what's next from Bring Me the Horizon. I think you then get something like OST Pussy or RIP Dustcore remix, and that is staggeringly different and 10 times more experimental than anything we got on the last record. And I think it's just weirder. I think this album is just weirder.
Do you prefer this over the Survival Horror?
I think they can both exist in parallel and be equally enjoyable, but I am more fascinated by this record than I am Posthuman Survival Horror.
Not to change the subject, my question here then is, what? That's a 7-8 track album. you slap those two together. Is this the end of Post-Human, or do you think this band's actually going to move forward with 3 and 4 at this point? Does it matter?
I honestly don't think it matters.
I feel like as a fan,
because there's no...
After having heard this, I do feel reinvested for certain in the Post-Human series. Granted, am I going to feel this way another 1,000 days from now when we get the third? I don't know. Probably not.
Album sequels aren't like books or movies or video games.
It's not a sequel.
It is in theory the second part of a.
It would be the second installment.
Yes,
which I would not call.
Here's what I'm saying is that in reality, there's almost no need to have heard survival horror. There is no need to have heard survival horror to enjoy this. Is kind of what I'm saying. Is that they could keep calling these Post-Human. They could not. And they would be received exactly the same way as far as I'm concerned.
So really, the reason I
don't think it's holding them back from doing anything is kind of what I'm saying, is that like there's nothing about the Post-Human namesake that's essentially saying, hey, we're limited to doing just these things. You know, somebody might say, oh, Post-Human series that Bring Me the Horizon has promised, that's 4 pop punk albums. Man, as a fan of metalcore Bring Me the Horizon, this is a real bummer. But as we can see from this album and even the last one, there's really nothing here that makes it
all over the
Post-Human in terms of its like genre affectations or like its presentation or its style. It's really just sort of like an aesthetic sort of connection between them that maybe someday they can package and it's 4 albums together and sell them as like a Post-Human series.
Yeah, and it's partly why I ask you if you think that this is the end of the Post-Human series, because to me, if we're looking at 23, 24 tracks and there's so much variety, do you think the band has already have accomplished what they set out to do, or whatever the promise of what Post-Human was, which was, hey, here is 4 or 5 tracks that are deathcore, 4 or 5 tracks that are poppier leaning, whatever. So do you think we've already gotten that? Do you think, what is Post-Human 3? Is it more deathcore leaning?
I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I don't know that Bring Me the Horizon even knows what they mean when they say Post-Human, or if they even feel tied to any statement they've made about this series at this point. Because like you stated earlier, it was meant to be 4 EPs released in a singular year and has now turned into 4 years, 1 EP, and what is seemingly a full-length album.
So right, but I guess that's where the question
Here's what I'm saying
stems
is that,
from.
No, let me answer the question you asked first, which is you're essentially saying, do I think they're going to continue if it feels like in some capacity they've already achieved what they stated they had set out to do? Hard for me to say. I think the only reason that I could provide you as something that would push Bring Me the Horizon the step away from this would be its reception. If people get a bad taste in their mouth in association with the Post-Human series, then that would give Bring Me the Horizon an incentive to step away from it. That's something that I could point to and say, hey, yes, I think they would step away for this reason. In terms of like how the band feels up until this point, that's really far too nebulous for me to really like have a strong opinion on. They could or they couldn't. I don't have enough information about how they feel about the series to give you a solid answer.
So
you know what I mean?
Let's put a pause on that then. Let's talk about the rest of this album.
Mm-hmm. I love the closer, Dig It. I absolutely fucking adore it, because for me it is such an incredible culmination of all of our emotions leading up into a point where we give up in a way that just it doesn't feel, it's not from a position of strength or vindictiveness. It's from a position of defeat where you almost take in the whole of everything around you and all of your experiences and say, fuck it, I give up. And there's something weirdly truthful to it, like weirdly real in a way that like is really scary, that I can connect with in a way that like I can't necessarily connect with all of like the high emotion of a lot of these other songs. But when you get to Dig It and this sensation of just being defeated, I think comes across so powerfully.
No, I mean, really well said. Dig It's absolutely a standout for the emotional capacity displayed. again, I really love the Dig. It's a track I really like because I wish that there were a few more songs that had, and maybe this is why it sticks out, that sort of like beginning and dressing from Mate.
Yeah.
That just, you know, hey, here's an audio log. Do you want me to play it? Yes. Like, hey.
I don't know. There's part of me that feels like that could feel tired 3 or 4 tracks into this album before we even get to Dig, where like all its novelty is gone. I think the fact that it's sort of like surprise appears at the very end of this, and like when you go watch the Dig It lyric video, like the little creature who's also on like the cover of the album is like they're talking to you and being like, oh, I'm collecting this audio log. I love the sort of like misfit toys of the cover of this album,
it's
and
fun.
that they're being given these not second lives. I guess they're sort of initial lives, but they're much more fleshed out than just being sort of like these things that like you can let your imagination capture and do with it as you play. No, they are much more well considered than initially I think any of us thought, considering a lot of people I think saw that album art and weren't overly enthusiastic about it. I think that they've really sold it since.
I forgot, man. It's been on obviously
there was
so
some
long.
negativity
There
when
was
that
some
album art came out, where
discourse.
people just weren't connecting with it. I think Bring Me the Horizon gets a reputation of being sort of a little bit edgy Hot Topic for the sake of edgy Hot Topic, which I don't think is entirely fair, but they are also sort of the poster child for this exact thing.
Which is, it kind of leads into the next question I had. How are we feeling lyrically? The reason I ask is because I'm seeing
yeah.
discourse.
I think people are right and wrong about this. I think people who are making big, bold, hard statements of this being sort of a lyrical disaster of no worth are completely off the mark.
How are you feeling about the vague AI generated lyricism allegations?
I saw that comment, and I saw that comment for someone who like whose opinions I generally like and respect. So I won't attack them specifically, but I do think that in some instances they are right about some of, not the AI generated aspect of this. I think it's just a way of getting your point across that works.
It's my least favorite new buzzword for what is ultimately, I agree, a problem that will rear its head sooner than later.
Sure, but it's also
applied to a band that I don't think deserved that.
Right. It's
shade.
It's a very effective way of critiquing art to call it AI at this point.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think there are instances where I do read or listen to some of the lyrics on this album and think
like
that...
what? Say them.
I mean, I think something like Dark Side for me is sort of like simplistic, or Strangers. We talked about them earlier. I think they're overly simplistic. You know what I mean? They're very broad. They're very easily digestible. There are other instances on this album with something like, I want to say it's the opening specifically of A Bullet With My Name On, where the lyrics do feel a little Hot Topic. They do feel a little 2007 t-shirt generated. And in that way, I can understand why people come into this album and they're like, oh, you know, we're talking about having, we're talking about my heart being blown out all over the wall, or being stabbed in the back, or things that like feel repetitive even within Bring Me the Horizon's own discography at this point, where it's like, not only do these lines feel as if they could have been crafted by any other band with a similar style, but I feel like you're yourself revisiting lines that feel overly familiar to me. You know what I mean?
I don't know if I quite agree with that last part, in the sense that Bring Me the Horizon are a band that have always revisited material.
But I don't think they're doing it in a way that feels like artistic and building upon sort of like...
What I'm saying is I didn't notice...
a second life. It just feels like... in some instances, and again, I'm coming at this from, I don't think it's something that plagues this record in any capacity, but I do think if you sit here with some of these lyrics, they're not the deepest.
No, sure, but that's not really what I was
Some of it's surface level,
at.
some of it makes for good aim away message material, you know what I mean? Some of it makes for good t-shirt font. But there are other instances where I really connect with lines. Like I'm thinking about Utopia, and I'm thinking about that line, and forgive me because I'm going to paraphrase it to some degree because I don't remember it exactly, but hard to miss like a cemetery. Talking about being dead inside, talking about being completely dead inside, and how that's hard to miss like a cemetery. And there's something about that line in particular where it's like I didn't catch it the first time around, but in the second go around when I sat there and I thought about it, and I'm like, this is significantly more clever than I initially gave it credit for.
That's why I bring this up. You've ultimately got us there, which is put some fucking respect on Ollie's name.
What I'm saying is that I think
all of what I will always appreciate about Bring Me the Horizon is they're not scared to take risks sonically or lyrically, and that yes, we're gonna have some awkward lines, some Black Bear tweets that made their way onto the album, but I have a soft spot, and I like them to the degree that I do, because I can always depend on this band to give me something a little more introspective, a little bit more. This is the, like,
you gagged me. I'm sorry. You gagged me calling emo lyrics Black Bear tweets. I just think that's such a beautiful thing that like that synonym worked so perfectly in my mind. I didn't even have to think about it.
Right. So for anyone not familiar with Black Bear's Twitter, go look at it, come back, listen to a bit of that album. You'll know what I mean. And the reason I bring it up is I forget what song it
John from the Main used to tweet like that too, where it'd just be like, just like really like bold, big, like emo, like calligraphy that you could get tattooed. Like it was very funny.
I misted you or whatever. I gave you a cookie, you didn't give it back.
I mean, but that is the aesthetic that like this band is sort of like.
I love
it. They put in effort to get across.
Yeah, but I love it for a lot of reasons, because the easy shit like that is somewhat earned because you have a lot of great lyricism doing the work. And that's what I like about the variety of the record, again, sonically, and that exists lyrically as well, because it doesn't fucking matter. This band can be semi-serious if they want to. They can make you reflect on your own life in tracks like Dig It, or they can name a song Pussy and be fucking weird and stupid and say, hey, did my knife...
the quote on how many times we're saying that this episode.
Did my back hurt your knife? When they say stupid shit like that...
Thank you. Like, can we... Well, I think it's fair to acknowledge that sometimes it's silly, and I think it is worthy criticism.
I think it's okay to like it.
I know you can...
Because that's where I land.
I know you can frame it in a way that, yes, makes it acceptable, and I will agree with you. But I think it's also okay for other people to criticize
There's also some genius, because you've got, like, a marriage of the two in extremely great lyricism and, like... maybe slightly on the badder side, where you end up on a track like Lost and a lyric like the next time I open up to somebody will be my autopsy, and like there's a little bit of genius there, and I love that, and I like that.
Right, it's almost like you need the misses to stumble upon the hits in some capacity.
Yeah, and I don't want this band to be like, oh well, we're not gonna use like a Black Bear tweet, because again I don't want this band to ever shy away from just an idea. I think that's ultimately the coolest thing about Bring Me the Horizon, and why it separates them from damn near every single other band in the scene, is they'll take that risk, and 9 times out of 10 they fucking land it.
I agree with that statement. Marcos, I wanted to jump to one of our patron questions. Again, patreon.com/SOTS podcast if you want to be able to ask a question on the show. As a way to transition into a thought I had that I wanted to get to, Sam C asks, what are your favorite songs on the new Bring Me the Horizon album? And did any of the songs surprise you in good or bad ways in terms of style, sound, etc.?
Favorites. And this is why I only want to compare it to something like Posthuman, because I feel the same way in the first 24 hours, not even, that this album's been out, that I do Posthuman, which is that I don't know if I will have a concrete favorite forever. It's always going to change.
Do you feel that way still about Posthuman survival horror?
I do, because there are days that I think Ludens is the best song this band's ever fucking written, and then I hear Teardrops and my mind is blown, and then I'm like, well, neither of these songs are better than the Baby Metal song Kingslayer. But also, we got Amy Lee on a track, and that ended up being pretty good too. Like a ballady fucking Bring Me song. That's crazy, right?
So to circle back, your gut check favorite songs at the moment.
I've got some big standouts. I think Utopia is one hell of a way to kick off this record. I think it's got a real banger of a chorus. And then Kool-Aid, a song I was ultimately not that hot about when it first released, has really started to click with me.
So fair to say you were quickly sold on this record overall within the first three tracks.
Yes.
For me in particular, the one that really stood out for me,
Is it Rip? That's what it is for me. That's probably the third.
it's not, though I do enjoy it. I would say that's the one. So the second part of Sam C's question there was what song kind of like surprised you? I wouldn't say that Dustcore Remix, RIP, necessarily surprised me, but I think it was the one that I was like stylistically most excited to hear on the record.
Okay.
Like once I was finished with it, I was like, oh, this was like a cool inclusion. This could have been
It was like
tandem
a
with
shotgun blast of adrenaline.
I think that in tandem with Lost and Die For You is this hyper pop meets metal that this band really kind of teased was the next era of this band when they first released Die For You.
Yeah.
And I think that could have been this whole album in some way had they, you know, decided to go in a different direction. For me, it's NA.
Interesting. I'm not. So one thing I will say, full transparency, is I'm not convinced there's a bad song on this record. I think it's all fucking good.
I think we started with the songs that were probably the least exciting for us when we spoke about Strangers and Dark Side. And I would say they're good songs. I just find them a little boring when in compared to some of a lot of these other tracks. That being said,
In Their Shadow.
NA really pops for me personally.
It does pop.
It starts with the familiar, hey, I'm Ollie, I'm an addict. But the way that it twists that narrative and then suddenly everyone else in that anonymous meeting starts making fun of Ollie Sykes and the way they build that into a song and then how it sort of like gets silly from there moving forward. I think it is a ton of fun. And I think that combined with Lost, which was still is far away my favorite single of everything we got leading up to this, a almost like picture perfect 1-2 punch of a version of Bring Me the Horizon that I think is in 11 out of 10.
Die For You is such an underappreciated song, by the way. It's so underappreciated.
I feel like I did not fully grasp how neat that song was at the time, probably because it was such a dramatic transition for me. But now, after having gotten Lost and now NA, I look back at that song 10 times more fondly. And then Dig It, which, like I mentioned earlier, really hit for me personally. If I had to talk about underwhelming songs for the record, I think
right before you get to that point,
Yeah, sure.
NA, Hey, I'm Ollie, I'm an addict. It's stuff like that where I think, again, on paper it might look stupid, but all of it translates so well to the album. And I'm just making another point about lyrically. While I appreciate so many of the things they do on this record, I think that song could have easily been looked at as a stupid thing that I think because of that risk came out. Like just the idea of like putting it on its head, making fun of Ollie. Like it's all silly. Like you really like the silliness of it, you said. But I think if you try to cap that and say like stop doing weird shit, you're essentially like putting a ceiling on whatever greatness this band is capable of.
Right, and this band is clearly unshackled in all of their choices.
Underwhelming tracks? Because I know you're not going to say a
think
bullet.
there is a pop with the inclusion of Under Oath on A Bullet With My Name On, but it also underwhelms a little bit just in terms of like the pedigree and by virtue of comparison to, say, Amen and its features. I just don't think it hits a home run as cleanly as I thought it would be on paper.
I'm the opposite. I think Amen is probably still one of the most underwhelming songs from this band in general.
Very interesting.
Due to the pedigree. So let me preface all of this by saying I really like Amen, and I like it more each time I hear it, and I think it's a really great song. But if you told me 5 years ago Lil Uzi Vert was going to be on Bring Me the Horizon song, that should be my favorite Bring Me the Horizon song ever. That should be this band's biggest song. And I'm not saying it should be just from like a commercial level because they're collaborating with the biggest artist they've ever collaborated with. But like, there's no reason I should think Werewolf, which was on the Lil Uzi Vert album featuring Ollie, is a better song than Amen, which is a Bring Me song featuring Lil Uzi Vert. Like, I think that...
Okay, so you're saying by virtue of expectation, that song will and still does feel overwhelming for you.
Personally.
Underwhelming.
Underwhelming.
Sorry. Yes.
And like, again, I don't... I don't mean to not include, like, Daryl's name in there. Like, Glassjaw's just not that band for me. Sure. So it's a cool inclusion there.
You're younger than I am. Glassjaw doesn't quite register as much for you. Glassjaw, even for me personally, I'm more familiar with Daryl Palumbo from Head Automatica than I am from Glassjaw, funny enough.
So, like, again, I look at this track listing and I'm like, what should be the best song on this album? Well, it should be Amen. And for me personally, it is not, which is why it is such an underwhelming track. And ultimately, that's the same. Like, if I look at this band's, zoom out, look at their entire discography, this should be the coolest fucking thing they've ever done, and it isn't. Okay. And that's the problem I have with that track.
That's fair. Did you want to touch on any more before I jumped into some other questions?
I know that obviously, just like many other bands, production is doing a lot of the work. Two things. Two things related to production. Ollie Sykes is still a much better vocalist today than he's ever been. And I know a lot of that is in part thanks to some of the things they're doing from a production standpoint. But, like, he just sounds fucking awesome on a lot of these tracks. Die For You sounds really cool. And I understand that as again, like that, Lost, these are overproduced songs, but in a good way. But I think just in general, Ollie Sykes is such a better vocalist than he's ever been in the past. And that helps me appreciate everything about this band even more. Also, as much as it pains me to say, and this is weird, and I'm sort of speaking out of both sides of my mouth here, in the sense that I loved Bring Me the Horizon long before Jordan Fish joined. I still maintain that probably There Is a Hell is my favorite record from this band. But I was super concerned about what this band would sound like post Fish, and they truly haven't really lost a step. They've lost some of the pop sensibility, and I think they've improved in other ways. You talked earlier about like, this band is a little harder to guess now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some added variety, some different sorts of risk taking in different departments is appreciated. Because this band was by no means growing stale, but being forced to go outside of the extremely large sandbox you were already in, and dig deeper and find different ways to Bring Me the Horizon, I think that's something that stands out on this record.
It's almost like putting a challenge in front of them for them to rise up to.
Right.
Not surprisingly generated a lot of good material from them, as we're seeing on this record. Marcos, again, some patron questions. Jose A asks, do we get a Bring Me the Horizon Discog ranking like we did with your Fall Out Boy review? It's weird. With the Fall Out Boy review, I felt like, let me just rattle off how I'm feeling about it. With Bring Me, it feels
there
like
are stakes.
Yeah, it feels too serious. I would ask this. At this point, would you be comfortable saying between Survival Horror and Next Gen, which of the Posthuman series is your favorite?
I think that's a hard question, actually.
Well, I've made it. I've brought it down from a harder question. That's where we're starting.
But I do want to answer both.
You're gonna do a Discog ranking?
And I did sort of answer this question earlier in the sense that, again, the only album I want to talk about in direct comparison to this one is the last one. I think once you start saying like, oh, well, how does this compare to That's the Spirit? Well, it doesn't. Like, this is, and I'm not saying it doesn't from like
I think
level.
that's a statement right there, though.
But like it doesn't from the standpoint that like I don't think it is that easy to compare these albums anymore. I don't know. It's so hard to.
If only there was a show where we would be.
That's the other
put in
reason
that
you're not
position.
You've got one rank. You'll see the rest eventually.
Every Wednesday night rank machine on our YouTube
to
channel.
answer your question though, why I do think it is still a hard question about which posthuman I prefer. Part of it is obviously because I've spent so much more time over the years with. It's been 4 years since the last posthuman. And we're looking at less than 24 hours at this one. And I do want to take, I want to submit a question right now to you in a second after I'm done answering. I know I'm all over the place.
For the record, I feel like what we're telling Jose is that we're not going to answer him. But respectfully, we appreciate your question.
But to answer Sam's question.
Ultimately, we will get there at some point, just not at this very moment.
I think for me personally, short term right now, I think that
rose-colored glasses of it all.
I think there's slightly higher highs on posthuman.
Okay.
But that this new record vastly beats out the entirety of that other record.
Right. Like if we're talking maybe individual songs, there were some stronger singles.
Yeah.
And then maybe even deep cuts by that. Like individually looking at those songs, they feel like they are higher highs, like you said.
No. I think the deeper cuts are worse on posthuman.
We're talking about Kingslayer and Butterflies.
No,
here.
I'm talking like Dear Diary.
Fair. Okay.
Where I think like, so I take Dear Diary over nothing on this new album.
Okay.
Is what I mean. That's the point I'm trying to make. But then I take a look at songs like Kingslayer and I take a look at songs like Ludens and Parasite Eve and I'm like, 4 years I've been marinating with those and like those are my ride or dies.
I think
it's going to take a minute for some of these new ones to get there for me.
I think if this album had ended up being a compilation of like 6 singles that we had already heard and one more song, then it would have ended up feeling lesser than Posthuman. But I think because it's almost like a completely different, more fleshed out experience, it feels like a more exciting album to listen to from start to finish.
It is. My question to you before we get to the rest of these Patreon questions.
Sure, because I am going to charge you for this.
We didn't really... You're not paying me to be here, barely. Because we haven't really discussed it yet, and I do think it's a slightly important aspect to this record. This is, in all seriousness, a surprise drop. For as much as this was something that we were all looking forward to.
I don't know. I understand that
major
I feel
RCA label, biggest band in this scene. Obviously an album we're all aware exists. 12 hours notice to go listen to it.
How do you think Bring Me the Horizon felt when they knew they were sitting on this surprise drop and 21 Pilots said, hey guys, we're actually delaying the album by a week? Not that like
respectfully
necessarily those two fan bases cross over, but they are in some capacity two of the biggest scene bands.
There are 2 albums we had planned to review this week. Before Bring Me the Horizon dropped this on everyone's head, Capstan and Red Handed Denial. And respectfully, how bad must those bands feel right now?
There is, yes, another layer to this, which is everybody else who had a release scheduled for today before Bring Me said, hey.
Exactly. But so right there, that's that aspect of that question. But the other aspect of like, what is... Do you think there was no value at that point to be like, hey, next Friday? Or is bringing
I think
it
it's
the
a
level where they
surprise
can
drop,
just say,
or I think it's one more single and then say the album drops in like 3 weeks.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I mean, granted, listen, the timeline talked about this album as much today as they would have if it dropped 3 weeks from now. So I don't think ultimately that matters or that should have factored in. But I guess I was just getting a temperature check on in 2024 how we feel about the surprise drop in relation to this scene.
I mean, I love it with the small asterisk that, like you said, there were a couple other albums that we were excited to talk about on this show that just like in terms of priority ended up falling to the back. And hopefully maybe we get a chance to revisit them in a future episode. But ultimately, I love it. I think it's incredibly exciting. I also think it's incredibly exciting because it's Bring Me the Horizon. You know what I mean? Like, we're talking about one of my favorite bands, and like coming from them, that's huge. You know what I mean? There are also a lot of bands who could drop a surprise album, and it wouldn't quite move me the same way this is, obviously.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the reason I bring it up, because like we can, with pretty much zero preparation, having heard this album 2-3 times each, filibuster for the past however long it's been, hour about this band. And again, part of it is there is so much stupid lore to this post-human thing, and it's Bring Me the Horizon and all that. But like, I guess the reason I bring it up is like we've seen this before. Bands like Northlane tried the surprise drop. I think that scared a lot of bands away from doing it for a long time. How do you feel about that being back? Or the option of maybe the rest of the scene looking at this and being like, oh, we can try that now.
Okay, how do I like it? Let's put it this way. How do I like it as like a marketing tactic, you're saying?
Yeah.
I think I love it. I just don't know that every band would have the same. The thing with Bring Me the Horizon is that they could approach this one of 15 different ways, and no matter what, they would have dominated the conversation the day that it dropped, right?
Fair.
You know? At least in like this space, right? With that being said, I think a lot of other bands could do it and would be overshadowed by a lot of other bands and then like probably regret that they didn't have the proper like build up to it with like the pre-orders and all of that stuff. But again, you're talking about an album that was surprise drop that was actually announced with a release date. It was delayed and delayed. It had pre-orders. So I do think this isn't exactly what like Northlane did.
I guess we didn't talk about this aspect in relation to this question either. Obviously, a band like 21 Pilots ducks, with all due respect, someone like Billie Eilish.
You think it's possible that Bring Me the Horizon could have looked at this and said, yeah, let's surprise drop the following week?
Right. Like,
but then you look at Bad Omens.
Should Bring Me be scared of a band like Bad Omens?
Well, no, but I would argue that maybe there is more crossover in that fan base than there is the one with 21 Pilots. I think you might look at a 21 Pilots and you go, you know what? They probably are competing with Billie Eilish. We're never going to outsell 21 Pilots anyways. Like,
okay, fair.
I really don't think there was a massive crossover, except in like, a podcast like this where behind us is like a 21 Pilots Funko, but then also like a Bring Me the Horizon vinyl.
We'd have 20 Ollie Sykes ones back there if they existed.
True. Andrew W. asked, Marcos, you can only listen to one for the rest of your life. Linkin Park or Bring Me the Horizon?
On 3.
1, 2, Bring Me the Horizon.
Easy. With the fullest due respect imaginable to Linkin Park.
It was different when I was 17, all right? But like now, today, Bring Me the Horizon is the band that obviously, you know, I'm probably the most excited to discuss on this show, period.
Linkin Park, a band with how many albums?
8, 9.
And how many misses in those 9?
Now, you know, there's some of the latter albums aren't my favorite. Absolutely.
Sure. The point I'm getting at is we're at 7 with Bring Me, and I don't think they've missed yet.
Bring Me the Horizon speaks more to me now, and I know this is funny saying it sort of in light of some of the other statements I've said about this band being an edgy Hot Topic band still. At my age, like currently at my age, this band speaks to me and my interests in music much more than like Linkin Park does, but also it's tough with Linkin Park because
the irony here that yes, obviously Bring Me, especially nowadays, is very clearly inspired by Linkin Park and new metal and whatnot.
It's a silly question, but it's a fun one. Brandon K wants to know, a lot of the fan bases get shit on for being annoying, but are the Bring Me the Horizon originalists the worst? Marcos, is there a lot of, I didn't necessarily see it on the timeline today. A lot of people upset about this being whatever level of heavy that they want Bring Me the Horizon to be?
The Bring Me purists.
Are they?
I think
I guess based on this question, I'll assume that some of that is going around.
I think Bring Me the Horizon dunked on them so hard when they referred to them as the kids on Instagram with the Black Dahlia tank
Sure.
that they've never been able to recover. And as a result, to me, have just been the biggest joke possible.
So I feel like this is a hard yes from
complaint
Marcos.
that they could ever throw in the direction of a Bring Me the Horizon, I laugh at. Because clearly the band is laughing at them. No one is laughing with them.
The scene in its entirety is laughing at these types of people at this point. So, like, you call them Bring Me the Horizon originalists. At this point, we just call them, like, the metalcore fans, right?
Well, right, but to some extent, too, it's like, well, I mean, you've been barking up that tree for, like, a decade now. You're not going to get anywhere. So, like, it's just something that I pay no mind to nowadays because, like, what point is like there's no point to you complaining about any of this, so I'm not gonna really worry about what you have to say, you know.
There was an interesting interview that came out this week with Courtney LaPlante, and I believe their name is, and forgive me if I get this wrong, Eli Ennis, who wrote, I don't know if you remember that article a few weeks back about sort of like metal being kind of washed in a sense, where all of our modern acts were a bit more
Fantano interview,
right, a little more pop leaning and theatrical than sort of like the raw metal that like you would think people of the genre would be most invested in, but whatever. But Courtney was sort of talking about when they release Spirit Box songs, sort of how they're interpreted by fans, like, and how metal fans kind of look at them as binary, like they're soft or they're hard. And and she was talking about how she would sit there when they drop a new song and read like the chat in YouTube, and it would be people complaining when there was singing and then getting super excited when there was screaming and a breakdown, and how that sort of like framed that all in terms of her perspective of these types of fans who really can't seem to divorce themselves from just looking at metal as this singular thing or expecting this singular thing from the bands that they listen to. And I've always said, hey, listen, if that's what you're looking for, fine. And it's out there in spades and you can go get it. And you're just not necessarily always going to get that same exact thing from one of the bands who has provided it to you in the past. But it might be more fulfilling if you were to open your mind a bit to what you can glean from music and what these artists can deliver if you weren't so bogged down in just the binary of it all, as
Sure.
Courtney put it. Marcos, final question. Positive Metalhead asks, with Bring Me's last couple albums incorporating some metalcore elements again and latest output by bands like Architects, what are your thoughts on post-metalcore as a genre term to describe these bands that have started in the metalcore scene but have since expanded and experimented their sound? To clarify, view genre as a way to discover and recommend music. So when terms start to become less useful to do that, when the music it describes is so different from each other, Knock Loose, First, Current Day Architects, I think is where another subgenre term becomes useful. Marcos, I've always felt that genre terms in general are so broad and encapsulating that I wouldn't call them valueless, because they do give you a general idea of what you're going to get, but there is so much, there's like a spider web from metalcore into all of the other styles. It is an umbrella too, that the idea of introducing another subgenre like post metalcore, I would actually be totally fine with. I think we quietly do it ourselves all the time. Just think in your mind the idea of being a metalcore band versus being a gent band. In theory, we call gent bands metalcore bands, but there is sort of like a secondary subgenre that they get pooled under, right?
Yeah. I do wish there was a way to file it to where like you could see it. It should be like the metal score and metalcore.
The
And
metalcore
then, like,
spectrum.
Right. Well, I was going to say like the little greater than sign that leads to like the next thing, the greater than like it
Right,
keeps
like you're going down into your folders until you get to like this, but they're
Right.
all under the metalcore umbrella.
Right. Like understand this is a metalcore band, but like they're gen with pop sensibility. Like it's like all this other stuff.
We talked about this off air at one point, but I really love when I listen to video game podcasts and they describe other games as likes, which I wanted to figure out a way to naturally incorporate this moving forward, where I'd be like, oh, Bring Me the Horizon. They're like, they're like in a Day to Remember, like with, sub aspects of like architects and like all this other nonsense. But
but it conveys that idea so well, because who are Miss May I? Well, they're an As I Lay Dying like. You can't call them a crossfaith like, because that means something else entirely.
Right, correct. But it does give you a general idea of what to expect, kind of like the For Fans Of, right?
Yeah.
Bad Omens, the whole baddie core of it all. Like these again are subgenres within just a larger umbrella. But for the most part, like a fan like me, if you say something's metalcore, it does give me a general idea of what I'm in for. And I think when you're able to sort of like branch out and appreciate lots of different styles of music, even within one genre, then that can be exciting to you, because you don't know exactly what it is, but you do know that generally bands in this space within the scene is something that you enjoy, right? And it also kind of tells you, like, it also helps sort of like facilitate what you're in the mood for, like sometimes I'm in the mood for pop punk or Midwest emo or metalcore or deathcore, and there's a lot of differences within those genres, but like it does sort of like meet me at where I'm at, like currently in terms of my listening mood.
Yeah, and I do think that there is still inherently plenty of value in it, and that's part of the reason why we partake so much, and why we also like mention, like this band's Spotify bio says that they're a fucking glitter pop death band from whatever, and it's like, okay, well that's something. But it works both ways too, because a lot of people aren't going to go out of their way to describe something for what it is, right? They'll just tell you it's a metal band, and they're not going to tell you what subgenre, even though it could mean, like you said, it's a spider web. It could mean 15,000 different things. But the other side of that coin is, you tell me something's like, if you tell me a metal band is specifically like a porno grind band, and suddenly I'm like, I'm all set.
Yeah,
I don't want to, right. So like, you got to be careful.
Before we move on to, I think what I would like is your final thoughts on this album.
Not what I expected it to be. Am I happy with what it is? Absolutely. Is it this band's best record? Who the fuck cares? Who the fuck knows? Vibes, 10 out of 10 immaculate. Is it a 10 out of 10 album? Who fucking cares? Who knows? I'm just happy it's here. Okay. I'm happy it exists. I like all of the dumb shit. I appreciate all of the introspective shit. I think that Bring Me is still a band that can really do no wrong. And the biggest value this band offers to our scene is that I think that they push so many boundaries that they inspire a lot of the bands around them. And most of the bands that inspire them, they bring into the fold. Like, Die from Pale Dusk.
Yep.
And I don't know. And also, final thought here is that as much as I will always look up to and love and admire Jordan Fish, Bring Me's going to be fine just without him. Just fine without him. Just like they were before him.
I think you summed it up perfectly for both of us, to be honest with you.
Cool. And the episode's not over yet, because we still have an entire album discussion to go.
Marcos, let's get into it. Clancy by 21 Pilots.
You make me sad and second guess myself. You could be so cold, Midwest indigo.
This is the Columbus, Ohio outfit's 7th studio album, released the 24th of May via Fueled by Ramen Records. Clancy consists of 13 tracks and is the much anticipated follow-up to 2021's Scaled and Icy LP. It was titled after Protagonist, that was introduced in their 5th studio album, Trench, which is already 7 years old. It released in 2018.
Insane.
And it serves as the final chapter in this band's near decade-long conceptual series. And yeah, it's explicitly called Clancy, so I figured it's probably time to do some lore.
We're doing a lore dump.
We're doing a lore dump. I want to get into who Clancy is, where Clancy is,
Why Clancy is.
how Clancy is, and this might be information a lot of people already know. And for those who don't, this is me forcing you to finally give into and understand this lore as best I can anyway. So we're going to do that. Sam, this is a comprehensive, heavy, dirty 21 Pilots lore refresher dump that I promise has like as much accurate information as I could possibly pull, I think. Again, apologies if I get much of this wrong.
I think it's good to say up here, up top, before we continue forward, that neither you or I are overly knowledgeable when it comes to the lore of 21 Pilots. I think this is something that you and I just recently tried to make a concentrated effort to really get invested in and understand a little better, knowing that Clancy is the closer of the story of Blurryface, which I'm sure you'll get into.
You, of course, especially as signals started to drop, much more open to it than I, but I feel like I've finally opened my arms a little bit, and
you've come around right on time.
Was ready to let it consume me. All the following details I just wanted to mention, I pulled from a thread on r/21 Pilots posted by their moderator, u/Mushwa. All information is notated as having been gathered from either a Discord click, dma.org.info, which is a website domain that the band officially created and hosts. Additionally, 21pilots.com has some of this information. So first things first, who the hell is Clancy? Clancy, Sam, is a disillusioned fictional character living inside a circular theocratic city loomed by huge walls. The worst possible thing that could loom a theocratic city, I've always said.
Huge walls.
Huge walls.
Trapped.
That city, and I hope to God I'm going to go with the right pronunciation, is called Dima, which draws its name from Dogma, or, in quotations here, Tower of Silence. In Zoroastrianism, in that religion, towers of silence were used to dispose of dead bodies by having vultures eat the corpses. That's why there's a vulture on the cover of Trench.
Interesting. Okay, that I did not know.
Dima, did you know this, Sam, sits in the lower region of the large and wild continent of Trench.
That I did know.
Which is the name of one of their albums, again. In this city, Clancy, in the city Clancy's from, rather, they follow a religion called Vialism. Vialism is kind of cool because the end goal is to take your own life. Kind of Mad Max style, which is actually the only route to paradise. Again, Valhalla, if you will. Some of this is also I'm not a lot of this extra flavor text is from the Reddit thread. A lot of it's just me.
Okay.
At times, all of the useful information is the Reddit thread.
And all of the bad jokes are Marcos.
They might be. This place is ruled by 9 bishops, not 8, not 10, 9. They're called the Sacred Municipality of Dima. The bishops' names were a combination of lyrics from different songs on their album Blurryface. Again, there's 9 of them. The most important one really is Nico, who also goes by the name Blurryface. Oh, crazy. More on Dima. Clancy's been in this bitch 9 years, okay?
Okay.
And Clancy's had it up to here with vialism. He's tired of these bishops. As a result, he's tried to escape multiple times, but is either stopped or eventually caught by Nico. That's why he's the important one. He's the head king bishop. During one of those escapes, however.
So just to pause for all the for everyone, just to make it clear. So like to take the sort of like flourish and the flowery sort of like descriptions out of it. You've got this guy Clancy. He's trapped in a wall city, and that makes it extremely hard for him to escape.
City.
But
it's
he
a
keeps
religious
trying,
wall city too.
But the leader of the bishops, this Nico guy, keeps fucking catching him. Got it.
Yep.
Boom.
He
Up to
said,
speed.
"Not on my watch." All right. During one of the escapes, though, Sam, Clancy meets the Banditos, okay? A rebel group that lives in the wilderness of Trench. They live up on the cliff tops. They're pretty integral to the story and kind of take this dude under their wing. It's a complicated relationship. It's pretty much the focus of the entirety of the Trench LP. So if you haven't heard that, you're out of luck.
But if you've seen some of the videos, right,
Yeah, yep.
you can see him sort of like escaping sort of out into the wilderness, the bishops chasing him, the banditos sort of like coming in.
Banditoing it up.
It's very theatric,
Yeah.
for what it's worth. Then there are also some videos that are sort of completely not tied to any of that whatsoever,
right.
like Ned helping them wash a pool.
Too far ahead.
Yeah.
Again, this is the Trench LP at this point in the timeline.
Yeah.
I won't spend much time on it because we're not there anymore, but we're going to move on. All right. We're going to go on to the Scaled and Icy stuff. The Scaled and Icy stuff is going down. It's an album in the lore that is described as propaganda. Clancy left the continent, Trench, was used as propaganda by the bishops. Clancy gives a performance on a submarine at some point that's part of this annual assemblage of the glorified thing that's
AAG,
like this whole
yeah.
like ritual thing. Again, they do it annually where people die and they're fucking killed and are used as vessels by the bishops to do like their dirty bidding, I guess. This is where I start to like my understanding of the universe sort of starts to crash and burn here and there.
It's gotten a little too deep for you, a little too nuanced.
It's not. If I there's
too
definitely a good
technical.
YouTube documentary out there I haven't watched that really sells me on this.
Sure.
It's got to be better than this one. But we move. We got to move regardless, Sam. In the Saturday music video, by the way, which is from Scaled and Icy, that song, Clancy on that submarine is attacked by a strange creature under the water. And at this point, him and like this torchbearer guy wash back up at sea. And I think that's where we are here in this Clancy
Song called
timeline.
Saturday. You said, hey, let's keep that in the back of our mind for when we talk about this album in a little bit.
Yeah. I think at this point, Clancy is back to wanting to destroy the bishops and Dima and all that other shit. And he starts learning psychokinesis.
I do the same shit when I want to destroy my enemies.
And that's like what the bishops be doing. So like it's bringing a gun to a gunfight. Like we're on their level at this point.
Yeah.
So at this point,
Yeah.
Clancy's off Trench.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
understanding is starting to like get a little crazy, a little shady, a little
No, what are you
rocky.
talking about? What's the shit? He escaped the city of Dima. He got on a submarine. And
He's
now
back in Dima.
Now he's on an island called called what?
No, he was on Voldzoi, I think, but now he's back on Dima.
Okay, so he went back.
He's got a renewed hope in his plan of overthrowing Dima. He's taking back his own identity. He's no longer a pawn for these bishops.
Yeah.
For this Nico guy, for this blurry face. And he's going to return to maybe he's already back in Trench. We don't know.
Hard to say.
And he's gonna fucking murder Blurryface. That's where this is all leading up to, okay? And he's gonna kill all these little bitch bishops. They've all had it coming.
Dark era. Joker era.
Right now, and this is sort of like the end, from what I can gather, Clancy seems to have reunited with the Banditos, who are waiting for him on the other side of the Paladin Stray, which is the name of the closer on this album. There's a new resistance growing inside the walls of Dima, and the revolution is nigh, Sam. It's coming. The members of the new rebellion against Dima have began to follow Clancy's motion. So it's all sort of coming together Dune Part 2 style at this point.
Okay.
Clancy, essentially Paul Atreides, right? And I guess what happens on this album is kind of what goes on after this point. So let's talk about it, Sam. That's the best lore dump I could do. Let me know in the comments if I did an awful job or an okay job. Knowing all that lore now, Sam.
It's crazy to me.
How do you feel?
I think the most incredible thing about 21 Pilots and the fact that there is such depth and so much lore is that knowing
So much intention.
none of it, I think, would not hinder your experience listening to this album in any capacity. I think they've done, and I'm not entirely sure if this is necessarily something that people appreciate or not, but the fact that they've figured out a way to have albums that are so deeply steeped in lore, but also separate them in a way that you don't need to know any of it to enjoy it. There is a fine art to that specifically that I think should be appreciated.
Right. The fact that Saturday can be such an integral part to this entire story, and then I hear that song and I'm like, Saturday, like it's just
right. They
there.
get to almost like live in two separate spaces at once. They get to fuel the diehards, yes, and their fervor for this backstory and this grand vision and this fantasy world and all of this, and then they also, for more casual listeners, get to fulfill them with just catchy little indie rock tunes.
And I like, personally, having been on both sides of this, again, sort of very against getting into the lore, and I don't really know why, up until this point. So for me, I go into an album like Scaled and Icy, and I don't really have any of the frame of reference. And same with Trench, and none of it really matters to me. And ultimately, I like those albums for what they are, I guess. And now on the other side, sort of listening to this with plenty of that knowledge in mind already, not only do I think it improves Trench and Scaled and Icy in my eyes, I think it adds to the listening experience here for sure.
I think another aspect that really improved this album for me personally, and it was a question from one of our patrons. Once again, patreon.com/SOTS podcast if you want to ask about anything in relation to the show. Lucretia and Taylor C asked, did you follow the Clancy live stream of the videos at midnight? And if yes, what did you think of it, Marco? So I didn't watch it at midnight when it happened, but I did go back and watch it today.
Full transparency. We were asleep.
Yeah, we were asleep. But that being said, like I said, I went back and I revisited, and it was actually really interesting. So the way it was done is that essentially it was Josh and Tyler, 21 Pilots, and their music video director and like sort of like working partner, Mark, all sort of discussing the songs and some of the ideas behind them, and then getting into like the music video.
Getting into the music video as in playing it,
playing the music video, and then talking about it a little bit, and like
Okay.
providing a little more context around like how they came up with the idea and like some of the thoughts about it. But they even and we can I'll get back to it because I don't necessarily want to paint certain things in a different light for you before you've had a chance to talk about them. But like Tyler said what like his least favorite songs on the album were, which I thought was one of the most hilarious, like crazy things to do in a live stream.
All right. So let's
He'd
flip.
be like, this song was, I didn't even want it on the album, but Josh convinced me. And then he got to another song. He's like, I'll be real with y'all. Josh also wanted this one. It is my least favorite song on the album.
Bro was feeling his drumming on those tracks.
It was crazy to watch someone like frame songs, but there was also a lot of like interesting like context provided behind a lot of the songs and videos and stuff. So I've seen every like video for this with the exception of Paladin Straight, which technically had like a placeholder video that was more of a visualizer.
So this still like just exists as like a VOD somewhere I can go watch it?
Yeah,
Okay,
the
I
whole
might do
hour
that.
and a half live stream. You can sit down and watch the whole thing.
So my question, or I guess I kind of want to do the reverse of the Bring Me
The
discussion.
reverse. Okay.
In that, then I do want to start talking about some of my favorite tracks on here, and then I would like you to share the two that Tyler specifically
that is
highlighted.
really exciting. Yeah, okay, let's get into that. Marcus, this is a crazy way to start it, but what are your favorite songs on this album?
So, starting in the same way that we did Bring Me, though, I would like to discuss singles first. I think Backslide, and I guess all of them were singles, but like the main ones.
Okay, so this
Backslide.
opens with Overcompensate, Next Semester, and Backslide, which were all singles. The other single that came just this week was The Craving, though it's a singles version. On the album, we get Jenna's version,
and
which
not
is
a
different.
single version anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So, Backslide for me, I think ended up being my favorite of the bunch.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Really?
Yeah, because I would say personally, it's my least favorite of the opening three singles that we get on here. I've really come around on a song that I enjoyed the first time I heard it, Overcompensate, to enjoy it somehow even more significantly, and I think it's because it opens the album and it's such an incredible tone setter. For me, Overcompensate runs away with it, but I would follow that up with Next Semester and then Backslide. Why is it that Backslide stands out to you so much?
I don't know. There's just something about like that song to me.
Clearly, the hook is working incredibly well for you.
It is, but like I think the best hook is on Next Semester, right? With like the "Hey kid, get out of there," like that whole thing,
right?
Like,
but to be difficult, you chose the outlier.
Backslide to me has the overall best feel.
Okay.
From beginning to end, I think that is the most. I don't know, but I think they were all very interesting selections as far as singles go. Overcompensate starts with like a minute of like ambience to some degree, is like that's not maybe the exact right word I would call it, but like it's not what Overcompensate ultimately is. Like a lot of people would probably forget that first minute before they
right,
think
because
of, like,
this is talking about like single versus album, like, and having that context.
Yeah.
And then I think Overcompensate works doubly well here than it even did as a single, where I already thought it was a success, which is I think why I appreciate it significantly more now in the context of the album.
Favorite songs on here?
Okay, so now we're sort of like stepping away
Yeah.
from the singles.
I really like the 1-2 punch of like I think this
I'm
album
curious,
starts fucking hot with Midwest Indigo and Routines in the Night directly after those singles.
Yes, sir.
I think those are huge. I think Midwest Indigo with like that synthier, sort of darker sound to some degree really
Did it feel like
works
this
for
band
me.
pivoted in a way that was almost really exciting right at the outset here? Where like you
Yes.
didn't expect to get something like Midwest Indigo after these first 3 singles, and suddenly like your interest feels significantly peaked. I was right there
Exactly.
with you.
And then Routines in the Night
It was
is,
like I didn't have this album pinned in a way that I thought I did.
right. Routines in the Night for me is a similar argument to Backslide, where it just has a good feel to it, and I can't quite place my finger on exactly what makes that song.
It's the style. It's
work
the
for
style
me.
of it all. For me, it's the style. It's sort of like the style of song it is, but not only that, it's the Tyler Joseph of it. Tyler kind of has a lot of different sort of like artistic personalities, and there are certain ones that I
A lot of it plays into the lore.
lean towards more than others, right?
Yeah.
Though, all being said, this album overall has sort of done a good job of convincing me that there are aspects of 21 Pilots style that I really do appreciate more than I thought I did when it works as well as it does in this record.
Yeah.
Like there are like ukulele version of this band, which I think that overall I was probably much more cooled on. Then coming into this record, it feels so much more important to me. It connects significantly more than it ever has in the past, and those types of songs work much better here. But I agree with you. There's something in songs like, it's like Routines in the Night, At the Risk of Feeling Dumb, and Snapback that harken back to a specific style of 21 Pilots that was probably the one that I was most in tune with when I first discovered this band, and is why those songs work so well for me on this album.
No, I love that.
So, fun fact, Midwest
Backslide,
Indigo,
Really?
per Tyler Joseph, no, sorry. Routines in the Night, per Tyler Joseph, only made the album because of Josh Dunn. It is his second least favorite song on the record.
Behind?
I won't say the other one until we get to it.
So we're still going through our favorites.
Well, we don't have to necessarily, but when we stumble, when it becomes part of the conversation, I'm almost curious to know what you thought about it, sort of, before I frame your perspective on it differently. You know what I mean?
So let's take it
A
one by
luxury
one.
that I guess I don't have in this conversation.
Sure. Let's take it one by one from here, I guess. Vignette,
Yeah.
I think's got an outstanding chorus.
Vignette, for me, had one of the more interesting backstories that Tyler Joseph sort of provided on it, where initially I went into that song and I wasn't overly enthusiastic about it. I think on first listen, it was probably my least favorite song on here, to be honest with you. Maybe tied with something like Lavish.
Okay.
And then getting context for what that song was, and Tyler Joseph sort of talking about how that song was sort of like him witnessing, so it's like sort of about drug abuse and stuff like that, and then me sitting and listening to it and seeing how obvious that comes across once I was given just a small modicum of like context,
Right.
And then how that framed it completely differently in my mind, and I appreciated it significantly more. And lyrics like talking about like the vignettes kind of like closing in, and then thinking about kind of like what a vignette even is, and sort of like
Right.
that darkness on the outside of
the
a
filter.
screen. I think it's a beautifully written song.
A track like Vignette made me realize how well a band like 21 Pilots can sell me on a word. Like I see Vignette
Interesting.
and like suddenly I'm like, you know what? Yeah, that does make a great song title. That does make a great like
That's kind of how I felt
anchor
about
to your
overcompensate as
Right.
well. It's like, no, it feels untraditional. It doesn't feel like an exciting song title, but then you hear it in the song and you're like, yes, this clicks.
Well, and maybe to a more specific to this album, you're never going to get a track called Paladin Straight on another album this year. So like then you get it from 21 Pilots and you're like, yeah, those words do fucking click together. Those are good words.
There's range here.
Yeah. I think lyrically, I've probably never given this band their due credit.
I wouldn't say never. I think that there was a point where you and I heard a song like Stressed Out, and we were like, yes, my guy is spitting here in a way that I can really appreciate.
Yeah, but no, I guess I'm going as far back as like Trench here. Not way back, but like
Is that not the
Trench-
start of the Blurry Face arc?
Yeah, well, that's what right, but I'm saying like Trench I remember was an album that I didn't particularly
In recent
love,
memory, maybe
right.
you're talking about, sure.
But like then I go and look at those lyrics and I'm like, yeah, there was definitely something here. I don't know about Scaled and Icy, but here it's like I'll listen to this album and then I'll actually pay attention to the lyrics and I'm like, oh, there's way more happening here than I was ever giving this band credit for.
You're
on a lot of
touching-
these tracks. We talked about like the whole Saturday thing earlier and how there's very clearly lyrical callbacks, references often throughout here, but even like the more simple stuff like overcompensate, shouting out Josh Dunn within the song in a
Breaking the
natural
fourth
way,
wall in a weird way.
still
Yeah.
being self-aware, breaking the fourth wall. And I also like the dumb shit too. Like it's a similar conversation to Bring Me the Horizon in that like the reason stuff like that really stands out and works is because you also get to hear how Tyler Joseph pronounces the words Capri Sun, right? So like there's that sort of stuff riddled in that I just find myself really enamored with.
You're touching on something that I should probably save for later in this review, but I would feel better getting it off my chest right now. In under 24 hours, I can confidently say this is far and away my favorite and arguably the best 21 Pilots album, period.
Ooh.
And I feel that strongly. I think everything that I thought this band did well in the past, they do even better here. And everything that I didn't feel connected to, that I thought this band swung and missed on in the past, they knock out of the park here in a way that convinces me that every aspect of 21 Pilots that I ever doubted is actually great because of how well it's done on this record.
How thoughtful it can be. Yeah. I guess I'm not really ready to commit to agreeing
I
with
know it's
you.
a bold statement, but it's truthfully how I feel. I've always been a little wishy-washy with 21 Pilots. I like a few songs here and there. There's a few other songs that I don't like. Overall, I end up with an album that I'm kind of 50-50 for.
So I'll hit you with a couple things. This eats Scaled and Icy's lunch 365 days of the year. This album is it's really curious going and hearing an album like this one and then remembering how you felt after Scaled and Icy. And like there's a very clear, in my opinion, and bizarre quality dip that took place from Trench to that album to this one that was, looking back on it now, just so strange.
But I'll be
How
honest.
did it even happen?
My inception into being a fan of 21 Pilots started with Blurry Face, right? And I think it's been slightly diminishing returns ever since that. But to be fair, Blurryface is an album that I didn't love so much as there were songs on there that I really loved. And this album for me is a complete turnaround where from start to finish, I think the vast majority of these songs are near perfect. And even in ones that like I don't think quite hit the heights of other tracks on this record, I like... For example, I didn't love, like I said, Lavish as much as everything else. I still think is a quite enjoyable song that runs circles around a lot of the deeper cuts from other 21 Pilots albums.
Okay.
If you can have deeper cuts on an album that's every song has been given like a visualizer and like a music video and everything.
I'll let you have it. I don't have to add my thoughts there. As far as like if I do think this is their best or whatever album, I do like it though. It's hard. It's so hard to discuss an album and give what is an essence a review.
You don't have to do it,
24 hours removed from when it drops. I feel
confident.
Well, where I'm going is I'm looking at tracks like Snapback and Oldie Station, and in my mind I remember liking those songs, but not really loving them to the same degree that I loved a lot of the other tracks on here.
Snapback's one of the best songs on here. Snapback has that moment.
That's why it's a hard conversation, is what I'm saying.
Snapback has that moment where Tyler Joseph is talking to Tyler Joseph in a way that, like,
It's
I love when they do that kind of shit.
Yeah. But right. So like, they're not actually bad songs, but to me, I'm like, well, I look at that song on the track list and I'm like, well, that's sort of where I started to lose some focus. So I don't actually, no, you're probably right in that Blurryface had a handful of those. Trench is not my favorite album from this band. Skeleton Icy was fine. It was okay at best. So yeah, maybe this is of the ones I've heard, because I haven't heard the 2 or 3 before it.
Yeah, you know, that's the sort of weird piece of this, is that because Blurryface was my inception, I actually never went back.
Asterisk.
Yeah, and listened to like the older albums.
I mean, I've heard tracks off of Vessel or Vessels.
Sure, you've heard like Car Radio or whatever,
of course.
Right? Yeah. Okay, so all that being said, let's sort of continue onward here. I'm assuming you hadn't heard the Craving single version?
I hadn't.
And still haven't?
No. What's different?
So honestly, I haven't heard the single version either. I'm trying to remember exactly how Tyler Joseph framed it. And when he was talking about it, he said specifically that this was the version he needed to have on the album, not the other one. I think this one might be more acoustic ballad than the single version, which I think might have like a higher production value. The video for this song is just like footage of like him and Jenna's relationship. And like the guy actually literally got like teary eyed during this, which was actually quite incredible to like witness in a way that was like, you put some, I put a lot of respect on that relationship, sort of like watching that reaction to this video.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I will say overall that like, not to cut Josh out of the conversation here, but there is something about Tyler specifically for me that he comes across as an extremely genuine and real person in the way that I picked up on, you know, not just watching this live stream, but even within these songs, there's something about like the way he speaks, like his delivery and the way he writes that is much easier for me to connect with, and probably part of the reason that I've always had affectation for this band, and because Tyler's voice is something that really clicks with me. And I really get that in a song like The Craving. I really get that in a song like Oldie Station.
Just on that note, as far as Tyler and especially their voice goes, really do appreciate I guess the variety in vocal stylings, as we all know, but like the delivery as well, because you can have a vocal style as I lose my voice 6 hours into this episode. You can have a vocal style, right? You have obviously the rapping side, the bars side of 21 Pilots, but the delivery side of that is equally as important. Like you can tell me what a 21 Pilots song sounds like, and when I go and listen to it, it can be nothing like you described because Tyler will approach. So if you tell me like, hey, well, we rap the first bit of a track like overcompensate or lavish, but like until you hear it, it's like, oh, well, that's not on paper, like reading those lyrics, how I would have expected you to really say those words or rap that part or whatever it is. So
there are moments where Tyler's almost just conversational, and it's almost just like he's speaking with you.
Exactly.
And I think that's what draws me in, like it's that connection. And then I think a lot of kind of how I felt about the songs, again, is sort of framed by the context that I was given directly from Tyler Joseph. So, you know, right before they went into playing the video for Oldies Station, like he takes a moment to pause and he's like, hey, I'm going to be incredibly real with you guys right now. This is me letting you know directly how I'm doing. Like how I'm like mentally, like where I'm at.
It's important to know.
Right. So, and I go back and I listen to that song and like, it's so much more beautiful being provided sort of that kind of like backstory behind it and having that in the back of my mind as I listen to it. And it really made me appreciate it more.
Fair.
And I think At the Risk of Feeling Dumb is kind of an incredible companion piece to Oldie Station that's a lot more fun by comparison, but it's kind of like telling a similar story.
Paladin Straight, 6-minute closer. How are we feeling?
I loved it.
Really
I
good.
think Overcompensate and Paladin Straight bookended this album incredibly well.
I agree. Surprised by how much I like Paladin Straight. I don't know.
There's something bigger about it. Like, and I think it's like the little things. It's the sound of the birds sort of in the end. And then it's the fact that the song isn't over. And then having this sort of like quote unquote twist ending for where we thought this record was meant to end versus sort of what it presents. Everything about Paladin Straight just feels larger than life. And I think that's why it comes across so well. You didn't mention it, but Tyler Joseph's least favorite song on this album is Navigating, a song that
like Navigating a lot.
I'm quite fond of it as well. I'm actually like, by the end of this, I was like, man, after all that stuff I said about like Tyler Joseph being someone I connect with and who I appreciate being real genuine and all this stuff, like from the musician's perspective, from the like from in terms of like the ear and what I'm hearing, me and Josh seem to align perfectly because I could not imagine cutting Routines in the Night and Navigating from this album.
Navigating for me is like, it's the middle of this album in the sense that like, it's not the best track on here, far from the worst. So I don't really have a desire to bring it up because I ultimately don't feel super strongly about it other than the fact that like, I know that is a good song.
Yep.
So disappointing to hear that's maybe the least favorite.
It's just incredible to me to watch somebody be like, and presenting to you for the first time ever, track 9, and then be like, not a fan of this one.
Crazy.
It was insane watching this happen.
But like at some point when you start explaining a lot of this to me, it makes sense. We're like, the Craving Jenna's version is not going to be his least favorite song on here.
Of course, yes.
It's not going to be Oldies Station if it's like a direct window into his soul.
Precisely.
So like it's got to be,
might be the most.
It's going to be
difficult
2 songs
one.
on
It's
here.
so funny because Josh starts him and he goes, "So we're not ever going to be playing Navigating live, huh?" And it was such a funny thing to think about because you're almost like witnessing a conversation that would happen behind closed doors. Right. And people would always tweet like, "Oh man, someday I hope Navigating makes the set list,"
Right.
but never understand why it won't.
6th time seeing 21 Pilots. Maybe we'll get Navigating tonight.
Right. Precisely correct. I think there is one thing that I won't say I'm disappointed about, but someone like me who is maybe not great at the subtext and connecting the dots wishes there was a little more of the lore aspect on the surface for me to feel like this was ending the story. Because, so for what it's worth, Paladin Straight, which feels like it is sort of directly kind of speaking to the story, is the one music video that we don't yet have that we're getting in June. But all of the other videos don't really provide any more context to the story.
And Paladin Straight's not like this big grand song either. in the
Right, like
sense
it's
that,
not
like,
providing you with a lot of deep detail. It doesn't feel like it's talking a lot. But again, 21 Pilots kind of does a lot of this sort of in the background
Visually.
and not like directly here. So I do still feel like Paladin Straight will end up being this grand finale that I feel like doesn't quite exist. But at my current state, like that's probably the one aspect where I do feel slightly like that's a bit of a missing piece here with
It's
all
a
of the context I had going into it.
Double-edged sword, because again, like, this is really the only time that I've jumped into that lore. I've known it's existed, haven't wanted to jump into it. So the reason it's a double-edged sword is because, like, you can appreciate all these songs just as songs, and you don't need to know that the Paladin Straight is the finale of some big trilogy. But alternatively, the reason it's a double-edged sword for me is that sometimes they hide the lore a little too well, and it's lost on me. And then, like, you know what I mean? So it's sort
right.
of
And so
like-
the argument might be, hey, feel encouraged to go out and get more of that story and so on and so forth. Right. But it's like, I'm here. I'm now. I'm in the moment. I wish it was there to meet me like, right. Like meet me here in the middle. But it doesn't quite feel like it is. Mark,
and maybe there was an argument at some point in this conceptual little trilogy. And this is a question I have for you. Do you think this whole journey would have benefited at all from, we've been seeing bands do it, we just saw Bring Me Do It, interludes, intros,
right,
outros.
like here's me kind of telling the story during.
Right.
It's just
here's me washing up on shore and coughing up a little bit,
I'm of two minds,
and then being like, "Is that the fucking Banditos in the distance?"
I'm of two
It's
minds.
like, Clancy, nice to have you back. Get on your feet, soldier. Like shit like that.
There's part of me that says yes. On paper, that is the album that I think I want.
While knowing full well, if not executed well, it could be extremely corny.
That's not where I'm going with it. Essentially, what I'm saying is that ultimately, what I've been given is an album that I'm not joking with you, like maybe one of my favorites of the year so far. Like, really enjoy. Completely caught me off guard how much I love this record. So for me to kind of like step up, like there are, like I said, I wish there was a little more. I don't know that I'd completely change the body of work to include it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know that I would take this 13-track album and add 5 interludes. I don't know that that would get me a better album.
But
That does feel like
4
maybe
or
a
5
way
minutes.
to get there. Sure.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to say, right?
Would you like to see that from the band in the future, assuming they
I don't know. I'm really
expand
curious what this band
narratively
chooses
on
to do in the
something?
future. So like we mentioned earlier, like they kind of end this in a way that's like, oh, well, I wonder if there is a continuation of this story actually. And we've been fooled to some capacity. But all that being said, it's like, I don't know. I'm kind of down for whatever 21 Pilots does. If the results are similar to this record, just in terms of like, again, would I have liked more of the story? Yes. Stripped of that easy context win for someone like me, I still walked away with an album I really enjoyed. So it sounds like I was kind of happy either way with this record. So it's hard for me to come in here and say like, I guess personally I do always prefer the idea of like this rolling concept with a record. So I would like that from 21 Pilots. I don't necessarily feel like it would have to be this story that they continue. I like the idea of them maybe starting a new story and maybe they approach it in the way that you just laid out and it feels a little bit more ingrained in the album. Marcus, we had a couple Patreon questions. Again, patreon.com/SOTS Podcast if you want to write into the show. Casey asked, after having seen all the music videos for Clancy, minus the one video that's not out yet, Paladin Straits, I can't help but be a little disappointed that there was so little substance in a lot of the videos. The videos for the first 3 singles all felt super thought through. Even the one for Backslide, where he was just riding a bike, it had a lot of thought. But a lot of the rest of these videos were super simple performances or random stuff that didn't have much substance. I know Marcos will disagree, but I'd gladly swap out a majority of the videos for the album for one additional lore-filled video. Musically, the album also ends on a cliffhanger, which is interesting since this is supposed to be the end of the storyline. Hopefully, the last music video will set everything straight. So I think Casey sort of stumbles on the answer here a couple of times. I think the video is going to give him a lot of what he's asking for. It's just not here yet. In terms of feeling a level of disappointment with the videos, I think that this is sort of a grand overtaking of a task to like shoulder this idea of having all of these videos ready, and then putting on top of that, being able to spread your budget out in a reasonable way to have videos for everything. I think seeing a band actually make what feels like a full-fledged video and didn't feel like a lyric video or a visualizer or something that was maybe significantly less or more constrained than a lot of what we got would have felt underwhelming to me. Like if I went into this and they were like, hey, we made videos for everything, and it's just like a character, like if it was just what Paladin Straight's placeholder is, which is like Tyler Joseph sitting on a cliff edge while the waves flow in front of him, and that's it for 6 whole minutes, right? If it was that, I would feel underwhelmed. I would feel like I was like cut short of a promise that I was given. Them giving me videos that are kind of like silly and not really attached to anything or just kind of like neat ideas, I think still actually fits into the persona of 21 Pilots pretty well. It still meets them at what they've always done. Some videos I liked more than others. Like I was really fond of Routines in the Nights video, which is just Tyler kind of like dancing and walking around like this kind of like dark house while Josh played drums in the background. It's very simplistic, but very effective. Same with the Craving, Jenna's version, very simplistic. It's literally just video footage of like Tyler's relationship with her, but very effective. That's probably like maybe like the lowest budget of it. Or At the Risk of Feeling Dumb, which is just like the band like setting up Josh's drums in a bunch of weird places and kind of like filming it. Or Oldies Station, which is like I'm assuming you haven't watched any of these videos. What they do is they have like a camera set up on like a wooden board, and they're pulling it forward as Tyler Joseph is walking towards the camera. But Josh is grabbing these tubes from the back and putting it in front so they can keep rolling that wood panel forward. There is a lot of cleverness and interesting ideas here, even if they're not videos that match the production value of Next Semester or overcompensate.
So the old Marcos would have disagreed with our patron here in that I probably would not have wanted more lore videos. I would have liked to see Josh and Tyler do neat things together, because that for me is what I'd been invested in previously.
You would have loved the video for Lavish, which finds the band essentially going to different locations and blocking out words so that they match the lyrics. So like they're standing in front of a Best Buy but holding their hands in front of the best so that like the buy lyric matches the lyric in the song.
Okay. All right.
And there's tons of that, and it's deeply, deeply silly.
The Marcos of today hates that. All right. And the reason why, and honestly, it's before getting invested in all this lore at the time of this record releasing, I remember feeling extremely let down when, despite Next Semester being a beautiful video, shot very well, great performance, very intimate, venue shots, everything was very cool about it. At the end of Overcompensate, seeing our like deer antlers be pulled down and Tyler Joseph is like Clancying it up or some shit. I don't know. You got Josh Dunn. He's the torchbearer. Like I see that and I'm like, oh, well, I would have wanted to see a lot more of this video. This is very cool. This is leading into something. And it's hard, right? Because you touched on this earlier when you said that like 21 Pilots isn't this band for a lot of people. And some of it seems fairly intentional in that they are very subtle about some of the lore. So in some capacity, some people do just want to go watch Tyler eat bread while riding a bicycle. And now for me, it's not that way. And now I feel slighted when this band tells me that they're going to release a video for every song on this epic closer to the trilogy. And that, like, I really wish, and I understand budget constraints exist. This is also one of the biggest bands in our scene. I would have liked to see them just go fully insane and essentially...
You wanted a 2-hour, or you wanted like a 45-minute film.
You beat me to it.
Cut up into music videos.
Yeah, I think this would have just been a really cool opportunity to make a film that, granted, like, you're in the end of the storyline, and I understand that maybe it wouldn't have made a ton of sense, of course, even further than just every song having a video. But, like, yeah, this would have been a cool opportunity to really go full steam ahead with this big, giant, expansive narrative that you've concocted. And, like, at least for the people out there who are extremely invested in that lore, this would have been an immense payoff. And I feel like it's a botched opportunity that it didn't all end up being stuff like that and stuff like a lot of those trench videos we watched.
That's fair. That's fair.
And now, yeah, right. And so, like, someone who was not invested in this lore 24 hours ago, coming out of this album, now knowing what a lot of these videos are after that big promise of having a video for every single song, I'm a little disappointed in what this ended up turning into.
Yeah, I think that, like, in theory, you could have crafted something that, like, thematically had, like, a lot of connective tissue from start to finish. So, again, it would feel like sitting down and watching a film, and that's not what the band kind of went for. And, you know, I think maybe there was a lot of open to interpretation in the statement of we're making a music video for every song that could lead you to believe that. Though, obviously, once you get next semester, you probably kind of understand that that's not at all where we're going.
Yeah, but like, and again, like, which is where initially where the promise of having a video for every song was cool, only to then realize that that's not very significant to me, because I liked what I saw at the end of Overcompensate, and I wish I could have continued to actually see that story progress before my eyes, as opposed to just, like, knowing that somewhere out there is a video for Snapback or Vignette, whereas realistically I'm now never going to go watch those. It's... God, and people might hate me for this reference. This is where Machine Gun Kelly releasing the Downfall High movie, fucking starring Lil Huddy, was important and appointment viewing for me, where each individual video would not have been, but telling me, hey, here's a movie about whatever, all these songs, and all of it's contained in one thing. And those are artists of similar stature where, like, yes, now that I think of it, 21 Pilots really could have pulled this off in the way that I would have preferred that they did, because budget constraints is not really the issue here.
So for you, at the very least, personally, it feels like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. I think that if you ask me, like, what I would have preferred, that is also what I would have preferred. Though ultimately, I'm not disappointed with what I got. I think that's kind of how I end up sort of framing this album over and over again, is that there's, like, a version of this album in my imagination that meets all of the ambition that I feel like I read into the statements leading up to it. And then once I'm finished with it and none of it's there, I'm just left with an album that I thoroughly loved. So it's hard for me to come back and push back hard on it, right? Like, I'll come in here with my, like, soft criticisms of, like, a future I thought I could have that I didn't, but it's hard for me to really be upset with the one I got,
right,
when I'm so happy with this album.
Every criticism is like, that was pretty cool. I guess it would have been cool if they also did this, but, like, I don't know.
I think maybe
that's
that's the difficulty of trying to sort of be two things to two different peoples. This idea that you are kind of a large band for more casual listeners in some ways, and in other ways you are speaking directly to this cult-like following, and I don't mean that in like a derogatory way.
I don't mean this in a derogatory way either, but are 21 Pilots an even better band if they are 100 times less popular?
I don't know, because in some ways maybe,
I
but
do
in
not
other
mean
ways
that-
this grand vision you just laid out is probably an impossibility for bands who aren't 21 Pilot size.
I guess what I mean is like,
Is there a more alternative version of
Is
this
there
band that
a-
really leans into
but I don't want it to sound like that.
crowd pleasing, like broader audience sensibilities? Maybe. But you know what? One of the things that I really love about 21 Pilots is that in so many ways they feel like a vestige of the past. Like, this is the type of alternative music that I used to really love. This is the type of indie rock bands that I used to really love. This is the type of hip hop that I used to really love. This is the type of emo music that I used to really love. And like, I feel like in a lot of ways, none of these styles of music really exist anymore, except where they all live in one single band who is massive.
Okay.
And it's so strange when I think about it, but 21 Pilots, they scratch so many itches that so many other bands don't get to that I used to have, and they solely are scratching all of them, which is so fascinating. Like, even having like a ukulele band is so strange to me. Fun fact, by the way, another thing Tyler was saying when talking about this album was that a lot of it was written with the ukulele, though not all of the songs obviously ended up being ukulele songs, which I thought was really interesting.
They wrote the first Metallica album all ukulele
Is that
first.
true? Yeah, fun fact. Marcus, we had one other question from Eric B. If 21 Pilots and Bring Me the Horizon did a collab, you know, the connection being they both dropped albums today, what do you think it would sound like? I'm adoring both of these records, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. A collab between 21 Pilots and Bring Me the Horizon, actually, I don't think is that outside the realm of possibility. You just mentioned Machine Gun Kelly earlier, who had an Ollie Sykes feature at one point.
Yeah.
The idea that 21 Pilots would have Ollie Sykes play a bishop or something, I think, is a universe that is theoretically possible.
He's the blurry face.
I wonder if these bands have ever crossed paths. At some point, you would think they had, right? Playing a festival together or something like
I would
that.
hope so, yeah. I don't know with something like this. I guess where I land is I don't think that either or featuring on each other's track brings out the best in each artist.
The thing is that I can't imagine what that is, and I think that's exciting for me.
It is exciting for sure.
But if you can have Lil Uzi Vert on a Bring Me the Horizon song, then like Tyler Joseph feels like a complete and utter reality. But now that I think about it, do 21 Pilots albums have features ever?
No, not.
I feel like I can't think of one
not
off the
that I
top of
can
my mind,
remember.
right?
But so to your point, it's not like these two are.
Somebody's
it's not
gonna be like, yeah, Patrick Stump on the first album, you fucking idiot. And I'm gonna be like, oh god damn it.
Of course. Gerard Way actually did backing vocals. Shut the hell up. These two would mix together fine. It's not going to cause like a bad chemical reaction, but I also don't know if it causes like the coolest chemical reaction either.
Interesting question, though, right?
Right.
Interesting. Hadn't really considered it, but it is a possibility. Marcus, can I get your final thoughts on Clancy by 21 Pilots?
It's also my favorite 21 Pilots album.
Okay, that's good to hear. And ultimately for me, I mean, obviously I reciprocate that, but then I double down even harder and say that I think this is one of my favorite albums of the year so far. It made me really excited about a band that I had always enjoyed but never quite adored, and it framed them in my mind in a completely different perspective. It's crazy to me that on their 7th album, 21 Pilots has now really solidified my adoration for them. And I think that this album felt effortless to me in terms of a listener. I ran it back over and over again with no problem. I just really enjoyed it. Like, I just really found myself having a good time listening to it. Even the sadder, more ballady songs that are found on here, just across the board. There were so many moments on this album where I just kind of found myself loosening up and kind of like dancing from like spot to spot as I was doing things around the house. And it's just like, this album brought like a happiness to me that I really appreciate it for. And I think that's one of the reasons why I just ended up loving it so much.
I do love that. One thing I guess I did want to add here is that more than anything else, what this album does for me is it cements 21 Pilots above Panic at the Disco
Oh, that's an
in
interesting.
the hierarchy of the emo trinity, personally, to me.
That's an interesting thing to do.
And I don't think it's just because Panic at the Disco is dead now and we have a full discography to really digest well. We see you down there. I think part of it is just at this point, I think 21 Pilots they don't have the better songs, but they got the better overall collection of albums.
You're saying 21 Pilots does?
They might.
Interesting. Okay. I don't know that this comparison needs to be made. I feel like this is an interesting out of left field way for
We're
you to
getting
end
fun, you know.
this review.
You're like, you know, it's best album of the year, fucking best album they've ever done. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Fuck Panic at the Disco too. While we're at it,
Incredible way to end the review, Marcus. Incredible way. Another thing that's fun would be your thoughts on these two albums from Bring Me the Horizon and 21 Pilots. Leave your thoughts in the comments. On the YouTube video, leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Follow us at SOTS Podcast on all social media. We'll be back next week. New album from fucking Bad Omens. Let's go. Love you. Bye.
good play.